The angel next door spoils me rotten. Volium. 1. Seiki-san cover art by Hanakoto. Chapter 8, The First Meal Together. Mahiru was going to start cooking dinner at Amane's apartment, and she presented him with a list of conditions. Amane would pay for half the cost of ingredients, plus an additional labor cost, plus the cost of any incidental expenses. The two of them would each contact the other no later than the day before if they had something to do and couldn't eat together. They would divide the work of shopping and cleaning up afterward. Regarding the extra labor cost, it had taken some work to get Mahiru to agree to it. Amane had insisted that he felt bad about all the time she was spending on him. It was to be expected, since she did all the work making the food. Aside from that, though, Amane and Mahiru had come to an agreement rather quickly. And so, the day after their agreement had been ratified, Mahiru came over early holding supermarket bags in both hands and made preparations to start cooking. "It's really all brand new, like it's hardly been used," Mahiru commented. "Shut up," Amane shot back. A beautiful girl stood in his kitchen, and she was wearing an apron. This was like a fantasy come to life. Amane was sure he was going to lose it any second now. When Mahiru pointed out, yet again, that he had really never used his kitchen, he felt a deep shame. "You've got an impressive collection of gadgets here, but they're like pearls tossed before swine," Mahiru observed. "Well, if you use them, they won't go to waste," Amane reasoned. "That's a poor excuse, after the fact. Your precious cookware is practically dying from neglect. All right then, bring it back to life with your amazing culinary talents." "I sure as hell can't." With gracious concession, Amane motioned for Mahiru to take over. She returned the gesture with an exasperated expression, but perhaps because she'd expected as much, she just sighed and didn't complain further. "All right, let's get started. Do you have any spices?" "Of course I do. Are you making fun of me? They're all properly stored and none are expired, either." "Wow, I'm surprised. It's because they've never been opened." "That's nothing to brag about." "All right, if you don't have what we need, I can bring things over from my place to use this once." "That would be helpful. For now, if you have the basics, I think we can make do. Also, I decided on today's dishes already, is that all right? I don't know much about cooking, so I'm happy with anything as long as I get to eat. I don't have strong preferences." "Really? Then let's hurry up and get started. Please show me where you keep everything." "In this basket." "They're really unopened, huh?" Mahiru raised her eyebrows in shock as she stared at the basket filled with untouched seasonings. Perhaps because she'd been warned before she'd seen the unused spices, she quickly reassumed her usual demeanor and began washing her hands at the sink. "All right, I'm going to start making stuff, so you can go wait in the living room or in your bedroom," Mahiru declared. "Okay. I can't help you with anything anyway," Amane accepted. "What a gentleman. I suppose you'd just get in the way if you hung around." "You're awfully honest." "It's just the truth. There's no need to sugarcoat it." As Mahiru said, he would clearly just be in the way, so Amane obediently returned to the living room and watched her back as she worked. When she had finished washing her hands, Mahiru quickly set to work. Amane didn't know what she was making, but based on the ingredients she had readied, it was probably Japanese food. Everything about this felt strange to Amane, like he was in a dream, but it was real. Mahiru was actually preparing the ingredients right there, her hair tied up in a gently swaying ponytail. "What's with this situation? It's like I've got a wife or something," Amane thought. Mahiru probably didn't feel the same way, but their setup looked a little too much like they were a happy family, and Amane couldn't help but imagine it. He didn't have even the smallest desire to live with Mahiru, but the sight of a beautiful girl standing in his kitchen was in itself enough to send his mind to all sorts of places. Whether or not there was any affection between Amane and Mahiru, just having a lovely girl treat him to a home-cooked meal was enough to touch Amane's heart. "Are you thinking weird things over there? You can stop with the strange speculations." Amane had frozen when Mahiru called him out. She'd guessed what he was thinking without even turning around. "She sure is sharp." Feeling amazed and anxious all at once, Amane stamped down on the not-quite-evil base instincts that had begun welling up inside him and returned to staring at Mahiru's back. About an hour later, Mahiru began setting out completed dishes on the table. She'd chosen to make Japanese food today, which was typical when one considered her penchant for healthy cooking. "It turns out you have quite a few utensils and seasonings, so it looks like I won't have to bring anything from my place. Starting tomorrow, I can try more elaborate dishes, too." "I mean, I'm just grateful you're making anything for me," Amane admitted. Perhaps because Mahiru hadn't known how many pieces of cookware and seasonings Amane had in his collection, she had made many simple dishes. Rather than anything more intricate, but the presentation was flawless nonetheless. Lined up along the table was an array of Japanese-style dishes. From fish simmered in soy sauce to dressed greens. From rolled omelets to miso soup. Every last item was something Amane could never dream of making himself. Previously, Amane had said he didn't have any particular likes or dislikes, but he did in fact love Japanese food. He wanted to reassure Mahiru, who looked apologetic for having only prepared easy recipes, that this was exactly what he had wanted. "It looks amazing," Amane said. "I'm happy to hear you say that. Eat up while it's still hot." Mahiru sat down in a chair next to her, so Amane took a seat across the table. His dining table was small, since he lived alone, so no matter how they sat, they were still close together. It was lucky that Amane happened to have 2 chairs just in case a guest stopped by, but seeing a beautiful girl sitting right before his eyes evoked some indescribable feeling from within him. Once Amane set upon the food, however, even Mahiru's beauty ceased to matter. Hurriedly, he said let's eat and started with the miso soup. The moment he brought the bowl to his lips and took a sip, the fragrant miso and the flavor of the dashi spread through his mouth. The gentle taste was so completely different from instant miso soup. Amane could tell that it must have been prepared with great care. The miso flavor wasn't overpowering, and it was thoughtfully seasoned to allow the taste of the dashi broth to come through. At first, Amane felt that the soup's taste was just a little bit strong, but after he considered drinking it while eating the other dishes, he realized that it struck the perfect balance and knew he would empty his bowl. Rather than being overwhelming, the miso soup was a comforting flavor. It was a taste that made you want to eat more. "Delicious," Amane said with sincerity. "Thank you for saying so." Mahiru's eyes crinkled in a relieved smile. Amane had been complimenting Mahiru's cooking for a while, but she'd probably been feeling nervous with this being the first time she'd cooked right in front of him. Mahiru watched Amane for a few moments before eating anything herself. Once she finally did start digging in, Amane extended his chopsticks toward the other dishes. Sampling a bit of each dish, it came as no surprise to Amane that everything Mahiru had prepared was fantastic. The simmered fish was bursting with juicy flavor without sacrificing its tenderness. Usually when fish was cooked for a long time to bring out the taste, it would naturally lose some moisture and dry out, but this one was plump and had a nice texture. As for the rolled omelets, they were tailored exactly to Amane's tastes. They were an enticingly vivid yellow, and when Amane stuffed one in his mouth, he was unsurprised by the gentle seasoning of dashi that greeted him. When it came to Japanese-style omelets, Amane knew, some people added sugar when making them, while others only used salt. These rolled ones had been flavored with dashi, however. In addition to the rich taste of the dashi, Amane could also taste a faint sweetness. He wondered if that light undertone came from honey. There probably wasn't that much in the rolled omelets, but the satisfying hint of sweetness brought out a real depth. Amane had no real preference between sweet or salty when it came to egg dishes, but the ones he liked best combined the complex flavor of dashi with what he suspected was a bit of honey. Mahiru had accomplished that expertly, and Amane found himself quite impressed. Quietly muttering that the rolled omelets were delicious, Amane grabbed another one with his chopsticks and quickly tossed it in his mouth. Not only had they been perfectly flavored, they'd been skillfully cooked as well. The stock added to the eggs made them extra juicy. These are definitely better than Mom's rolled omelets. He kept rude thoughts about his non-present mother to himself as he smacked his lips happily. Then he realized that Mahiru was staring at him. "You really seem to be enjoying it. Because it's all so good. I'm paying my respects to the delicious food." "Sure, all right. Besides, doesn't it feel better when I'm honest about how much I enjoy it rather than sitting here eating with a blank expression? If you think something's delicious, you've got to really act like it, otherwise, the person who made it will be left wondering. Even if you say you enjoy it, who would believe you if you didn't look the part? It's better to be honest and just let how you feel show directly on your face. Whether you're the one giving thanks or being thanked, it's best to do what feels good." "Yes, I suppose so." Mahiru seemed to understand what Amane was saying, and she smiled slightly. It was a gentle expression, and it betrayed just a hint of relief. It was sweet enough that all of Amane's thoughts ground to a halt for a second. "Fujimiya?" Mahiru asked. "Ah, no, it's nothing," Amane replied. He'd been enchanted by the angel's smile, but he couldn't possibly tell her that. To conceal his growing embarrassment, Amane took another bite of food, ending any further discussion. "Thank you for dinner. I'm glad you liked it. Amane had completely devoured every dish Mahiru had laid out. Mahiru's words had been calm, but her expression was serene, and she seemed happy that Amane had packed everything into his stomach. Not a single grain of rice had been left behind. It was delicious, Amane complimented. I could tell that much just by watching you, Mahiru quipped dryly. Better than my mom's cooking. I hear it's taboo to compare a girl's cooking to your mother's. Isn't that only true when you're criticizing someone? Anyway, does that bother you? I don't mind, no. Well then, it's fine, right? It doesn't change the fact that it's delicious. Mahiru was clearly no amateur cook. Amane's mother probably had more years of experience under her belt, but she preferred different tastes, and many of her dishes were fairly bland, so they were no match for Mahiru's carefully concocted foods. Man, this is so awesome. To be able to eat like that every night, exclaimed Amane. As long as I don't have anything else going on, that is, Mahiru added. So I can really host you every night for dinner? I wouldn't have suggested it if I was against the idea. Well, I guess that's true. Mahiru was a straight shooter, so of course she would have never agreed to it if she didn't want to in the first place. Amane still wasn't sure if it was okay to have her cooking for him like this so often, however. He was paying for half the ingredients, plus a bit extra to cover her labor, but even so, he couldn't help feeling like the burden on Mahiru was too large. Do you normally cook for boys you don't even like? Amane asked. I'm doing it because you were neglecting your health. Besides, I enjoy the act of cooking itself, and I don't hate seeing you eat it with such gusto. But, Amane started. If it bothers you that much, it would be no problem to stop. No, please, I'm begging you. At the first sign of Mahiru possibly not cooking for him anymore, Amane instantly retracted any and all complaints. That was just how much her food meant to him. To have it snatched away now, it would practically be a matter of life and death. Amane was entirely aware that Mahiru had gained full control of him by way of his stomach, but Mahiru's cooking was just too delicious to refuse. Returning to convenience store meals now would be like robbing the world of color. Shocked at Amane's immediate reply, Mahiru was stunned for a moment before breaking into a smile. Well then, please continue to enjoy. Okay. It appeared that Amane's days of dining with the extremely charitable angel who made all the food by hand would continue for a while yet. Amane couldn't help but sigh from happiness, guilt, and anticipation. Chapter 9 The Angel's Birthday. Amane, how'd you do? Semester exams had finally ended. Having survived their collective hell, the students gathered in their classroom, more excited and animated than usual. Amane and Itsuki, both relieved that they had wrapped up all their tests, were comparing their performances. Oh, pretty average, Amane answered. Not that great, not that bad. The exam had covered the expected material, so for anyone who studied daily, it wasn't that difficult. Amane had done about as well this time as he had with other tests, leaving little to say about his academics one way or the other. Amane got bored easily, but he nevertheless always made sure to study. He was able to retain most of the things taught in class, but it was far too difficult to get a perfect score, so his scores usually floated between a solid 80 and 90. I bet you'll make it into the top 30, if you didn't outdo yourself, you egghead, Itsuki teased. It's because I study every day, Amane shot back. Well, how nice for you. Don't start, you're the one forgetting to study cause you're too busy flirting. The difference between Amane and Itsuki probably had less to do with their intellectual capacities and more to do with which one of them spent all their free time with a certain girlfriend named Chitose. Itsuki had the ability to make it into a pretty high score bracket if he ever bothered to study seriously, but since Chitose was his real priority, his actual rank was much lower than Amane's. Girlfriends are great, you know? Itsuki said wistfully. Yeah. Hey, Amane, you should get a girlfriend, too. If guys could just get girlfriends whenever they wanted, the men of the world wouldn't shed so many bitter tears. There were plenty of unsatisfied men who would have taken offense at Itsuki's thoughtless remark. Amane, though, wasn't really inclined to get angry with him over it. In fact, he'd never really felt that way about any girl, so he was content to let the comment pass. Assuming I did get one, what then? Amane inquired. A double date, Itsuki replied. That would end in a bad case of heartburn for my fictional girlfriend and me. We'd have to break up. You could flirt in front of us, too, you know. Do you really think I can find a girlfriend, the way I live? I guess it's impossible, right? Amane was honest to a fault, even with himself. He'd always found other people difficult and exhausting, and he was aware that many people found him to be standoffish. That, plus the blunt way he spoke, meant he was not all that popular. Amane's social status would have made it hard to find a girlfriend, even if he was looking for one. Against all odds, if Amane did somehow find a girlfriend, he was sure they wouldn't be like Itsuki and Chitose. He couldn't picture himself flirting in public with a girl, oblivious to anyone who might see. Come on, you should at least find someone you like, Amane. If you just cut your bangs a little shorter, cleaned yourself up, and maybe found a style that worked for you, the girls would definitely look at you differently, I'm tellin' ya. Assuming Amane's self-evaluation was accurate, he didn't have the handsome looks of a pretty boy like Yuta or a Romeo like Itsuki, but he definitely didn't think he was ugly, either. Amane figured that if he just spent more time on his grooming and paid more attention to his clothes, he could rival most of the other boys his age. The problem was that he didn't know enough about fashion to dress well, and he was certainly not smooth enough with his words to win any girl over. I'm not interested in the kind of girl who picks a date based on appearance, Amane asserted. You say that, but if you don't get them interested in the first place, you won't even get to know them well enough to judge their personality, right? Itsuki argued back. Even if that's true, I'm not really looking for a girlfriend right now. Were some hypothetical girl ever actually interested in Amane, it would be all over the second she saw how he lived. Amane was a slob with no life skills, and on top of that, he had a difficult time getting along with other people. If there was a girl who was drawn to him, despite all that, he'd like to meet her. Such a hopeless thought was enough to bring a bitter smile to Amane's face. Besides, since Mahiru was cooking dinners for him now, a girlfriend could introduce some unpleasant complications. Not that Amane intended to pursue a relationship in the first place, but that was simply one more strike against the idea. Amane felt that Mahiru's delicious cooking was worth more than the possibility of an as-yet unseen girlfriend, and that conviction was not likely to be easily overturned. Ugh, you're so boring. How about I get Chi to introduce you to one of her friends, offered Itsuki. You care way too much about this. Most of Chi's friends are too excitable. It's hard for me to hang out with them, even as friends. Amane quickly shot down the idea. Only because you're so gloomy. Oh, shut up. Well, if you say so, I won't say anything to her for now. But as a blossoming high school boy, isn't it sad to live an empty life, all by yourself? I don't need a girlfriend, they're too much trouble. Just what do you think we're supposed to be doing at school anyway? Amane thought. Even if he wasn't actually that serious about his studies, he still didn't see the point in spending so much time worrying about romance. Above all, finding a real match was no easy feat. What a waste, Itsuki grumbled. Yeah. Amane shrugged. But listen, you'll change your tune when you find a good one, Amane, you hear? What makes you so sure? Because girls particularly like to fuss over guys like you. Whatever you say, man. Amane couldn't imagine acting so sentimental, it didn't seem possible. He decided to simply ignore his friend's words. Itsuki was looking at Amane with an exasperated glare, when suddenly, his line of sight shifted, and his face relaxed. Itsuki, let's go home together. Ah, Chi. Just then, Chitose appeared. Apparently, Itsuki had promised to walk her home, which brought a swift end to their conversation. When Amane turned to see where his friend's attention had shifted, he saw a girl with medium short light brown hair tinged with red, looking their way with a radiant smile. Well, to be more accurate, she was only looking and waving at Itsuki. The girl's lively aura and bright, smiling face were enough to make Itsuki beam whenever he saw her. That was the kind of effect Chitose had on people, and for better or worse, she was always the center of attention. Chitose was a different type of beauty than Mahiru. She had a great big smile as she rushed over. With any luck, she wouldn't have much to say today, because usually whenever Chitose talked, she made fun of Amane. You agree, right, Chi? Amane's the type of guy who needs a girlfriend to take care of him, don't you think? Itsuki asked. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong, chided Amane. Wait, what, do you have a girlfriend, Amane? Chitose exclaimed excitedly. No way. Ah, bummer, Chitose said, pouting. If you did, I'd want to be friends with her. Knowing your idea of friendship, I would feel bad for my imaginary girlfriend, Amane said. Oh, so you have an imaginary girlfriend? Chitose asked. Weren't we just talking about what if I had one? Kidding. I get tired just talking to you. That's just because you don't have the stamina to handle me. Don't have the patience, more like. Even a short exchange with Chitose was mentally exhausting for Amane. Most of the time, he tried to keep his head down and avoid other people, like at school. When he found himself forced to carry on a conversation with someone as extroverted as Chitose, it was really demanding. Chitose didn't let Amane's sour attitude bother her at all and flashed the exhausted-looking boy a truly joyful-looking smile. "You're such a mess." Itsuki smiled in the same way and tossed out some perfunctory advice. "You'd better get your act together, buddy." Amane was already too worn out, managing only to let out a deep sigh. "What are you doing?" After returning home and gobbling up Mahiru's handmade food, Amane returned to the living room once he was finished doing the dishes and saw Mahiru with a question sheet spread out before her. There'd been no agreement about cleaning the dishes, but Amane took the initiative to shoulder the burden whenever possible. While he'd been tidying up, Mahiru had gone to sit in the living room. It would have been inexcusable to make her do everything and then hurry on home. "I'm grading," Mahiru answered. I can see that." She seemed to be reviewing her answers with her textbook out, checking that she hadn't gotten anything wrong. "So what's the result?" Amane asked. "Well, if I didn't make any recording errors on my answer sheet, then it's a perfect score. I can't think of anything to say except it figures." Just as Mahiru didn't show much of a reaction in regard to her errorless work, Amane didn't have a very exaggerated response. He wasn't surprised. Because her name was practically always written in the top spot of the periodic exam results. He knew Mahiru was more than capable of a perfect score, so he was not the least bit surprised by her performance here. "It's because studying doesn't bother me. I've actually already completed all of this year's coursework, so now it's enough to simply review," Mahiru explained. "Whoa, you really go all out," Amane replied. "You study a lot yourself, Fujimiya. You know what my grades are like? I sort of remember your name in the ranking list." Apparently, Mahiru had known a little bit about Amane before they ever spoke. She must have noticed him among the top ranks, because she recounted his exact placement on the most recent test without hesitation, almost like she was looking at the list right now. Amane did work pretty hard at his studies, but it wasn't because of some earnest drive for success or anything. It was because of an agreement he'd come to with his parents. In order to live alone, he had to maintain good grades. "Well, it's a condition for my current lifestyle, I have to keep my grades up." The only other facet to the agreement was that Amane had to visit home at least once every 6 months, but he could take care of that over long school breaks. Basically, as long as he was keeping his grades up, there were no problems. "I study hard enough to keep my head above water, but nothing like you. You really put a lot of effort in." "I have to try hard," Mahiru mumbled, casting her eyes downward. Her expression was hidden by her bangs, and while Amane couldn't get a proper look at it, anyone would have recognized it wasn't a happy one. Before he could get a read on her, though, she quickly looked back up, once again wearing her usual expression. Even if there had been time to point out the curious change, Amane probably wouldn't have. He could tell that Mahiru was carrying some kind of painful burden by certain things she did or faces she made. While Amane made sure to never ask Mahiru what was bothering her or what was so unpleasant, he still got the impression that she was struggling with something. Amane imagined that, whatever it was, it had its origins in her home life. It was hardly the kind of subject he could just casually broach with the girl. He understood that this was not an area in which an outsider like himself could intrude, and so Amane never touched the subject, and he persistently tried to maintain a sense of distance appropriate for a neighbor. Everyone had things they didn't want to talk about, even Amane. Treading thoughtlessly on Mahiru would be rude, and he was sure that she appreciated the fact that he pretended not to notice her distress. Having disguised her abrupt change in mood, Mahiru declared in a clear voice that she would be heading back to her own apartment. She put her textbook and her answer sheet back into her bag. Amane didn't have any intention of stopping her, so he replied simply sounds good, and watched Mahiru get ready to leave. When the angel had finished putting everything away, she stood up from her seat, and Amane noticed that she'd left something behind next to her empty cup. He picked it up and discovered it was a case holding Mahiru's student ID, the kind any student would have. She'd probably pulled it out along with her textbook and forgotten to put it away. Along with her name and picture, the little plastic card displayed common information, like her student number, birthday, and blood type. After staring at it for a second, Amane called out to Mahiru, who was in the entryway and putting her shoes on. "You forgot this," he said. "Oh, sorry for the trouble. Well then, good night." "Night." Mahiru gave a quick, polite bow and turned her back on Amane's apartment. With a small sigh, Amane watched her leave. Thinking back to the birth date listed on Mahiru's school ID, Amane put a hand to his forehead as he realized something. That's in 4 days, isn't it? If he hadn't unintentionally seen the girl's ID, he likely never would have found out. Amane wished that he'd known about Mahiru's birthday a little earlier and let out another sigh, a deep one. Hey, I was wondering, is there anything you want? The following day, Amane tried to see if there was anything Mahiru might like as a gift. There was no ulterior motive behind the gesture. In fact, Amane had been thinking for a while that it might be nice to get something for the girl who had been taking care of him every day. A birthday seemed like the perfect time. There must have been something odd about the way Amane phrased the question, however, because Mahiru gave him a puzzled look. One that made Amane begin to regret asking such a direct question. Why are you asking all of a sudden? Mahiru inquired. You don't seem very materialistic, so I was just curious. Out of nowhere again. Amane thought that he should probably have tried to play it a little smoother, but it was too late for that now. The one possible saving grace was that Mahiru didn't seem to have realized that this was about her birthday. As far as she knew, Amane should have had no way of knowing her date of birth. Hopefully, that would keep her from catching on. Well, let's see, there is one thing I need. I guess that's what I want right now. What do you want? A whetstone. A whetstone? Unconsciously, Amane repeated Mahiru's words, because the girl's answer had been far too unexpected. No one could have expected that kind of answer from a high school girl. Normally, you'd think they would want cosmetics, or accessories, or bags, or something like that, Amane thought. He would never in his wildest dreams have expected a girl to want a tool for sharpening metal. That's right, a whetstone. I already have several, but I want one with a finer finishing surface, you see, Mahiru explained. Are you sure you're really an ordinary high school girl? Amane asked. Please don't expect me to be ordinary. It was difficult for Amane to object to that. Mahiru could not be called an ordinary high schooler, by any standard. Describing her as an angel seemed entirely accurate. Mahiru was a prodigy who was good at school and sports. What's more, she was an excellent cook and a skilled housekeeper. As if that wasn't enough, Mahiru was a noble young lady who spent so much time taking care of a slob like Amane that she could have been mistaken for a married woman. Still, who could have imagined she'd want something like a whetstone? Mahiru had to be the only high school girl in the whole world who wanted such a thing. You can't buy it yourself? Amane wondered aloud. She was well off, after all. It's not exactly that I can't buy it, you know. It's just I won't have that many opportunities to use it, and it's pretty expensive. After considering all that, I couldn't really justify the purchase. I already have one that can put a decent edge on, so I keep telling myself that I don't really need it. Amane had to admit that it was more than a bit frightening to know that Mahiru owned several whetstones already. How many high school girls out there sharpen their own kitchen knives? He asked. Quite a few, Mahiru replied. Even if there are, you're the only one I know, and you're also the only one who wants another whetstone. Well, I suppose it's nice to be unique. If you say so. This certainly was an angel with unusual interests. Amane couldn't make heads or tails of her. Mahiru tilted her head in confusion as Amane stood there looking baffled. He'd completely lost sight of his original objective. Hey, Itsuki? After completely failing to decide on a gift that Mahiru might appreciate, Amane had decided instead to consult with his best friend. Itsuki had a way with women's hearts, as well as a girlfriend to consult, so Amane expected that he would probably have some grasp on what a girl would normally want. While he wasn't really sure it was a good idea to try to apply normal standards to someone like Mahiru, he expected that she wouldn't outright hate things that made someone else's girlfriend happy. What's up? Itsuki replied. When you give Chitose presents, what do you usually get her? Amane thought it would be best to start by asking what Itsuki bought for his girl, but all he got back was a blank stare. Huh, you planning on giving a present to some sweetheart of yours? Do you think I have it in me to do something like that? Nope. All right, then. In that case, why are you asking? Someone I know has a birthday coming up, so I wanted to ask you. While Amane was planning on listening to Itsuki's advice with the utmost attention, he was also keen not to reveal too much about his own circumstances. For starters, you should try finding out what they want. You know, it's important to do that sort of research on a regular basis. It's the secret to a harmonious relationship, I'm telling you, said Itsuki. I told you that this isn't for a girlfriend, Amane reminded. Setting aside the potential grave danger the other boys at school would pose to Amane's physical safety if word ever got around, Mahiru was too awe-inspiring to even consider asking out in the first place. Sure, he was comfortable hanging around with her, and they got along well enough as two frank individuals, but there were absolutely no romantic feelings between them. Sure, she was cute, but that didn't mean Amane wanted a relationship. What they want, huh? And what if you don't know? Amane asked. Depends on how close you are. If you're good friends, an accessory or something is good, but if you're not close, something practical that they can use is a safer bet. There are lots of girls who are happy to get flowers but don't know what to do when they receive them, Itsuki explained. You sure know your stuff. Well, I've done a fair bit of research, I guess. Itsuki and Chitose hadn't always been so wild about each other. Their relationship had slowly developed, first starting in middle school. Amane had gone to a different middle school, so he didn't really know all the details, but apparently, they'd gone through a lot together, and their relationship had grown from those experiences to the point where these days, they wouldn't shut up about each other. To hear him tell it, Itsuki had also been fairly lost the first time he'd had to give Chitose a present, so Amane figured he could benefit from his friend's experience. Oh, and no girl hates hand cream, Itsuki added. Hand cream? As Amane was pondering this unexpected option, Itsuki grinned and explained proudly, no matter what age they are, every girl has some use for it. If she's a student, her hands get dry from handling notebooks and textbooks in class. If she's in the workforce, her hands dry out from typing and air conditioning, and housewives cook and clean, so their hands take a beating, too. You can't go wrong with that stuff. You sure know an awful lot about women's hands, Amane said. You're the one who came and asked me. Itsuki snapped. Itsuki slapped Amane on the back, but there was no power behind it. The two friends shared a laugh. Hand cream, huh? I guess that is a pretty safe bet. Amane had been taking the initiative on washing the dishes after dinner, but Mahiru obviously did her own dishes at home, so he could imagine her hands could use some moisturizing. More importantly, Amane was sure she took care of her hands already, since they were so smooth. A gift she could use right away really was the best plan. Cool, thanks for your thoughts, Amane said. Let's try asking Chi, too. As a fellow girl, she probably has a better idea, proposed Itsuki. You gotta warm up to her. Amane certainly didn't hate her, but Chitose was not exactly his favorite type of girl, and being around her always made him feel awkward. Usually, he tried to avoid interacting with her altogether. Itsuki slapped Amane's back again gently, smiling in amusement. Wha? Amane, you're giving a girl a birthday present? Chitose was smiling, no, smirking at this rare development, and it was all Amane could do not to grimace. He had gone to Chitose's classroom to talk to her after school, and sure enough, she seemed greatly amused. Incidentally, Itsuki had sent Chitose a message saying that he wasn't worried about her being alone with another boy as long as it was Amane, so he had gone on home. Amane had sighed softly, while Chitose had worn a wide grin. I told him I didn't want to ask her. It was obvious that she was definitely going to pry and ridicule him, so he hadn't intended to turn to her for help at all. Amane certainly didn't hate Chitose, but he couldn't deny that there were some things about her that he just couldn't stand. Okay, so Itsuki wrote here that Amane was hoping you'd give him some pointers. So you want my help, huh? You're the only girl I can ask, Chi. It doesn't sound very nice when you put it like that, you know. Chitose looked at Amane with clear pity, but he let it pass. The truth was, Amane had no female friends outside of Chitose. Every single girl in his class barely counted as acquaintances, and he wasn't close enough to any of them to be able to ask for help with things like this. Actually, Amane was usually rather quiet in school. If one of his female classmates tried to talk to him, he probably wouldn't know what to do. Alright, well, I can't imagine you really understand how girls think, Amane. But don't worry. Miss Chitose is here to advise you. I guess I'm in your hands, Amane said. You guess? What's to guess? I may not look it, but I know women's hearts perfectly. I mean, you are a girl, after all, I guess. Watch it with those guesses, buddy. I'm not sure I like what you're implying. Chitose cleared her throat and thrust out her chest. Compared to Mahiru, who Amane saw every day, the result was underwhelming at best. Amane awkwardly stared at the ground. Regardless of what he personally thought, Chitose was popular with guys. Personality-wise, she was cheerful and friendly, and she talked to everyone without playing favorites, so hers was a different kind of popularity than Mahiru's. She got along with boys and girls alike. She really was the epitome of a life-of-the-party kind of person. She had apparently been a member of the track and field club in middle school, and her slender build and toned legs certainly didn't hurt her popularity. It was a verifiable fact that her legs were beautiful, so much so that Itsuki had warned other guys in school that he'd get angry if they stared at her too much. Ah, right, Chitose chittered. Something for a cute girl, let's see. There were definitely times when she got too friendly, but Amane wouldn't deny that Chitose was cute. He could understand why other guys in school liked her. You know, Chitose added, that glum attitude of yours is seriously gonna give people the wrong idea. Gee, thanks for your concern, Amane replied. Fine. So you're giving something to a girl, right? Well, what kind of girl? Chitose's question didn't leave him much room to maneuver, but Amane knew that if he was careless with what he told her, she wouldn't let him live it down, so he chose his words gingerly. She's an acquaintance of mine, and she's relatively young. Beyond that, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. If you won't tell me about her personality or what she likes, even I can't come up with any ideas, you know. Can't you just tell me some things that you would like to get as a gift? Then I'll choose from among them. I get it, you don't want to tell me anything about her. Fine, we'll do it your way. Chitose made a good point, but if he told her any more, she would know that Amane was close to a girl their age, and it was likely that the conversation would veer off in a strange and uncomfortable direction from there. If he really slipped up, Chitose might even end up figuring out that he was talking about Mahiru. Amane wanted to avoid that if at all possible, so he'd decided not to tell her anything that wasn't strictly necessary. Chitose also seemed to understand that he wouldn't willingly reveal much more, and thankfully, she was kind enough to back off on the questions. Let's see. I don't know what type of relationship you have with. It wasn't the kind of hand cream that smelled particularly nice, nor was it all that stylish. Instead, it was the scentless kind that was gentle on the skin. That way, it wouldn't cause any trouble while doing housework. This was the sort that was advertised as moisture-retaining. Amane had made sure to check the reviews of the product on the internet, so he was certain of its efficacy. Yeah, sorry it's nothing too crazy. I just thought that since you do a lot of housework, your hands might get dry. They had scented ones, too, but I thought you might have some of those already. Apparently, it's effective and easy on the skin. It is, quite practical, Mahiru said. I thought you would value practicality over anything else, answered Amane. Yeah, you're right. Thank you very much. Mahiru smiled slightly, as if she understood Amane's reasoning. A little less nervous now, Amane's expression softened a bit as well. It seemed like he'd made a good impression. There was one more present, though, and Amane felt embarrassed to have Mahiru open this one in front of him for some reason. He'd hoped that she would only notice it after she had gone back home. However, Mahiru was peering into the paper bag, looking as if she had already noticed that there was one more thing hiding within it. What, a second one? She asked. Yeah, there is. It's a bonus, I picked it out myself, Amane answered. What does that mean? Exactly what I said. Amane averted his eyes. Mahiru tilted her head in confusion for an instant, then promptly pulled the second gift from the bag. To purposefully disguise this other present, Amane had intentionally wrapped it in paper the same color as the interior of the bag. He'd hoped that would make it stand out less and that Mahiru would only notice it later when he wasn't around. Unfortunately, it was large enough that Amane should have known it would be impossible to miss. There was honestly no way Mahiru could have overlooked it. Unlike the hand cream, this present didn't come in a box, just a polyester bag. It was just about the right size to fit comfortably in Mahiru's arms. The bag was tied up with a navy blue ribbon, and Amane watched Mahiru undo that carefully as well, wondering if it would be all right for him to stand up from his seat. Finally, Mahiru carefully pulled out what lay inside. She held the bag's contents up gently with both hands, blinking her large eyes dramatically, looking truly surprised. A bear? Mahiru mumbled. It was a stuffed animal. Not too large, it was perfectly proportioned for an elementary school student. Its light-colored fur was soft, much like Mahiru's own hair. A light blue ribbon was tied around the toy's neck to form a collar. It had a rather cherubic look stitched onto its face, and the round, cute button eyes had a luster to them that reflected Mahiru's face as they stared at her. Doubtless, the girl was wondering why Amane had given her such a thing when she was in high school. The truth was that Amane had taken a risk and chosen it based on Chitose's advice that girls liked cute things no matter how old they were. Of course, he had been much too embarrassed to go by the bear alone, so Chitose had come with him to make the purchase, though only in exchange for the deluxe crepe from the shop in front of the station. Chitosa's smiling face had loomed over Amane throughout the whole process of buying the bear and getting it wrapped. In the end, he couldn't help but think it might have been better if he'd just gone alone. Though, there was nothing he could do about it now. I thought it looked like something a girl would like, Amane mumbled to no one in particular, scratching his head. He was terrible at stuff like this. The last time he'd gotten a present for a member of the opposite sex was when he'd given gifts to his mother as a little kid. Amane had never once thought he'd have to pick something out for a girl. So it doesn't faze her to get a cute stuffed animal from a boy, huh? Risking a quick glance at Mahiru, Amane saw her staring directly into the bear's face. He couldn't tell from her expression whether she was happy, only that her eyes were fixed on the stuffed animal. I mean, if you don't like it, you can just toss it, Amane said, hoping to diffuse the situation with some light humor. Mahiru turned sharply toward him and drew her eyebrows tightly into a frown. I would never. Sure, didn't think you would or anything. The response had been so absolute that Amane couldn't help but flinch and barely managed to nod in answer. Mahiru looked back at the bear in her hands again. I would never do such a cruel thing. I'll treasure it. Slender arms embraced the stuffed bear, as if to wrap it up entirely. Amane couldn't decide if Mahiru looked more like a child with a favorite toy or a mother protecting an infant. Either way, she certainly embraced the bear enthusiastically, looking down at the thing as though it were the most precious object in the world. Mahiru's face was not the stony mask she kept up at school, nor was it the face she often wore when she was exasperated with Amane. This time it was peaceful, soft, and somewhat affectionate, an unmistakably sweet expression. Amane felt an innocence in her, and her pure smile was beautiful enough to take his breath away. She was really exceptionally cute. I shouldn't be staring, Amane thought. Mahiru was liable to notice if he kept looking at her like that. Amane was certain that he wasn't in love, but seeing a beautiful girl make a face like that, and knowing that he was the cause of it, undeniably made his heart throb. She looked so adorable as she sat there with a faint smile, hugging the stuffed animal to her chest. Anyone who saw her would have been captivated by the sight. Amane certainly was, despite his usual reservations. Just pressing a palm to her face would have made it immediately apparent how much warmer it was than usual. Embarrassed after being so open with her emotions, she swore under her breath. Damn. The word was so quiet it could barely be heard. Fortunately, Mahiru did not seem to have noticed how Amane was looking at her, because her face was half buried in the stuffed animal that she was clutching to her chest. She still looked extremely sweet, and Amane was worried he would say something strange in spite of himself. I'm really glad you like it. Thankfully, Amane managed to keep what he said brief. Quickly, Mahiru turned to face him. This is the first time I've ever received something like this. Huh? With how popular you are, I thought you'd be getting presents like this all the time. What do you take me for? It came as a relief to see Mahiru's usual behavior return, but that was only because Amane couldn't see her current expression behind the bear. I never told anyone when my birthday was, Mahiru continued, looking back down at the stuffed animal. I hate that day, so I don't really share it. Mahiru's expression softened as she looked at her gift, though her words remained sharp. The apparent dissonance set Amane on edge a bit. Normally, I hate getting presents from strangers, so I don't accept them, Mahiru explained. You're accepting this, though, Amane said. Fujimiya, Mahiru said quietly, you're not a stranger. Face still half buried in fur, Mahiru looked up toward Amane again. She wore a dreamy, innocent expression. It was captivating, and as Amane gazed at the angel sitting on his couch, he realized he was in trouble. Mahiru was so cute that Amane found himself reaching unbidden to stroke her hair, and he had to quickly stuff his hand behind his back before he did something really awkward. That was close. If Amane had let his guard down, he probably would have started patting Mahiru on the head right then and there. Doing something so inappropriate would have destroyed everything he'd built with her. What is it? Mahiru asked. And nothing, Amane replied shyly. Perhaps Mahiru had seen his arm move, or maybe she'd noticed his obvious distress as he struggled to keep his alarming feelings from bubbling to the surface. Mahiru's head tilted to one side in puzzlement. That simple movement was enough to leave Amane speechless, and it occurred to him that beautiful girls possessed a terrifying power. Still, he felt embarrassed for being so captivated by Mahiru's cuteness. He was also confident that if he told her how he felt, she would just be confused. Something about the feeling instilled a sense of danger in Amane, and he did his best to push it deep down. Thank you very much, Fujimiya, Mahiru said in a soft voice, but Amane had already turned away from her. Hey, Amane, how'd it go with that girl you got the present for? Obviously Chitose was going to pry, since Amane had convinced her to come along shopping with him. The day after Mahiru's birthday, Amane was confronted by Chitose's grinning inquiry. Chitose was in a different class but had come to his classroom after school. That alone wasn't much of an issue, but hers was the sort of smile that made Amane feel like she was up to something. Today especially, he felt the urge to turn and run. Nothing happened, at least, not anything like you're imagining, Amane answered. It was the truth. He definitely wasn't holding on to any amorous feelings, and he hadn't given Mahiru the present because he hoped it would lead to the start of something more. Sure, she'd graciously accepted the gifts, but there had certainly been no romantic developments of the kind that Chitose anticipated. Now hold on, Itsuki interrupted, the fact that you were so concerned about someone at all is a pretty rare thing, you know. You suddenly have some acquaintance that you seem involved with, and it's a girl. Very suspicious. It's nothing like that. Amane knew he had to shut this down now. He was happy that Mahiru had been pleased with her gifts, but he was starting to think that bringing other people into the situation was more trouble than it had been worth. Not wanting to feed their curiosity anymore, Amane had answered as bluntly as possible, but Itsuki had his hand to his mouth, as if he was pondering something. Say, Amane? What is it? Is it possible that the person you gave the present to is your neighbor? Itsuki was smart and very perceptive, which at times like these could be a real pain. What makes you think that? Amane asked nervously. Well, she's the only person I could think of that bothers taking care of you. And you're not from around here, so you don't know many people. Plus, you don't hang out with many girls. She brought you dinner that other day, right? I was thinking that maybe this was about you wanting to return the favor. Well, Amane has been looking very healthy recently, right, Chi? Oh, I thought so, too. She must be bringing him meals pretty frequently, huh? I wonder if that's why he wanted to give her a birthday present, to thank her? Amane fought to maintain a blank expression as Itsuki perfectly described the situation to Chitose. It was so accurate that it was like he had been there to watch it all go down. Sometimes Itsuki was scary like that. Amane could see why his friend was so popular. He was a bit of a show-off but also smart and thoughtful. Amane just wished Itsuki would save the grandstanding for his girlfriend. What an overactive imagination, Amane interjected. Well, you won't fess up, so imaginations are all we've got. Come on, spill it. Itsuki pressed. Who knows? You're holding out on us. So stingy. Chitose chimed in agreement. Shut up. No matter what anyone said, Amane wasn't planning on confirming the truth. If he let anything slip, Itsuki and Chitose would never stop hounding him until he'd spit out the whole story. Really, Itsuki was only the tip of the iceberg. Amane was in the presence of a high school girl who loved gossip, especially when it came to romantic affairs. While there wasn't the slightest bit of romance to be found here, if Chitose got one whiff of the person involved, Amane would never hear the end of it. Sighing in exasperation, Amane finished packing his things and shouldered his backpack. He'd decided on a strategic retreat, before his two friends gave him heartburn. See ya. You two can go ahead and flirt all you like in private, Amane said. We were gonna do that whether you said to or not. Itsuki shouted. Itsuki, weren't we gonna tail him and try to meet the girl in question? Yeah, you probably shouldn't discuss your operation in front of the target. And anyway, there's nothing to see. Even if there was, you two would never make it past the lobby. Amane scolded. TCH. Chitosa's lips curled into a cute pout, but her eyes were serious. Apparently, she really had been planning on tailing Amane. Nervously hurrying out of the room, Amane left his friends behind. That was a close one, Amane grumbled without thinking. What was? Mahiru asked him curiously. It was still a little early to make dinner, but Amane and Mahiru had gone shopping and come back to his apartment. They'd been relaxing for a bit, when Mahiru overheard Amane talking to himself. Mahiru had been acting the same as usual. There was no trace of the girl who'd been so enamored with the stuffed bear. The same placid expression remained, and Amane wondered if perhaps he'd dreamed up the whole birthday incident. Actually, he preferred her this way. He wasn't sure his heart could stand regularly seeing her look at him the way she had the other day. Well, Itsuki and Chitose were suspicious about the present. Amane intended to explain that he'd consulted them about the present, but Mahiru seemed to remember Itsuki's name, and she exhaled, saying I see, as if she understood. Well, it didn't seem like the sort of thing you would buy on your own. That's not what I was concerned about. Apparently, no one thought Amane was capable of getting a gift for a girl. If he was being honest, he really didn't think he'd ever experience the many sweet and bitter feelings that were supposed to accompany love all at once. My shopping is my business. Why does everyone think that way about me anyway? Certainly, Mahiru was cute, and yesterday he'd felt a desire to reach out and touch her. That much he couldn't deny, but what young man wouldn't have felt that way? Mahiru was outrageously beautiful, after all. Amane had been caught up in her beauty, that was all. Nothing about what had happened was evidence he had any deeper feelings. Mahiru was a great person, but Amane was not interested in her like that. He glanced over at Mahiru. She was just as beautiful as ever, but Amane's heart didn't pound like it had the night before. Once again, he reminded himself that he didn't care for Mahiru in any meaningful way. Worried that Mahiru would say something if she caught Amane staring at her, he looked down at his phone instead. When he did, he realized he'd received a ton of new texts. Thinking it was probably Itsuki, Amane decided to check them, but it turned out they hadn't come from his friend. Amane frowned at the sender's name, Shihoko. She was one of only 3 female contacts in Amane's phone. There was Chitose, Mahiru, and Amane's mother. Wondering what she could possibly want, Amane tapped the message thread. He hated dealing with his mother's high-strung questions, always asking him how exams were going or whether he needed anything. He could barely handle Chitose, and yet some members of his family were just like her. In fact, Chitose might become very much like Amane's mother as she got older. Shihoko wasn't so bad that Amane outright hated her, but he couldn't stand his mother's personality. I brought some fruit back from grandfather's, so I'm going to share it with you, Amane. I'm sending it over, so be at your place on Saturday afternoon. I won't forgive you if you refuse delivery or aren't there to get it, okay? So you can just decide my plans all on your own. Amane muttered. Now, he didn't actually have any plans for Saturday, but he thought his mother ought to have at least contacted him a little earlier. Did something happen? Mahiru must have heard Amane's whisperings, because she looked over at him with her usual calm expression. My mom picked some fruit at my grandpa's place, and she's sending it here on Saturday afternoon. Probably apples and stuff, Amane explained. Do you peel your apples? I guess I could do that, with a peeler. That would peel them, but it'll take off a lot of the flesh, too, so it's a little wasteful. Mahiru's words sounded like something Amane's mother would say, and he tried to swallow that thought before it surfaced. If it comes down to it, we can just eat them whole, he said. How savage. It's a pain to peel them. Amane shrugged and grinned haplessly. You're such a mess. Despite Mahiru sounding annoyed and giving a rather brutal assessment of Amane's table manners, the way she held herself also showed some understanding. I guess it's all the same once you eat them. You know, I'm not sure I'll be able to eat them all before they go bad. Do you want some, too? Asked Amane. Sure, I'd be happy to take some. Fruit is expensive, after all. It was kind of a domestic thing to say, but then again, that was the kind of person Mahiru was. Saturday, right? In that case, I'll make us lunch beforehand as thanks, Mahiru said. But you're always taking care of me already, Amane protested. Like I've told you, I really don't mind making food for you, Fujimiya. Mahiru smiled very slightly. Somehow, the little grin made Amane feel awkward. It called to mind the events of the previous day, and Amane couldn't help but avert his eyes from the beautiful angel in his apartment. All right, thanks, he replied curtly. Chapter 10 Mother Invades. Asking Mahiru to pick up her portion of the fruit as soon as the package arrived turned out to be a big mistake. When Amane heard the sound of the intercom and the high-pitched, mischievous voice that called AAA Mani, through it, he understood that he was in trouble. Amane had been very grateful for Mahiru's proposal to make lunch for him on Saturday. It had seemed a veritable blessing from heaven at the time. Truly, the carbonara she'd whipped up had been delicious. The thick-bodied sauce and the kick of black pepper were a perfect match, and it had been tremendously tasty. Mahiru hadn't done anything wrong. Those at fault were Amane himself for failing to recognize in advance what his mother had meant by telling him to be home on Saturday for the delivery, and that irksome, surprise-loving woman herself. Fujimiya? Is that the delivery? Mahiru asked. Nope. That would be my mother. She's probably using her duplicate key to get through the front door and is heading up right now, Amane explained. Thinking back on it, it had been his own mistake to take what his mother had said at face value. One way or another, she always created situations that allowed her to come by and check in on him. Amane's mother could never resist employing a little misdirection. Your mother? She probably came to see whether I'm getting along okay, and she didn't tell me she was coming. Probably because she knew I would clean up in advance. Aha. I know it's all a bit hard to swallow, but that doesn't matter right now. Right now, the problem was what to do with Mahiru. If Amane's mother had still been in the lobby downstairs, he could have sent Mahiru home, but that was out of the question now that she was approaching his door. At the same time, his mother was sure to get the wrong idea if he invited her into his apartment and she came across Mahiru. There was no doubting that Mahiru would hate that as much as Amane would. The longer Amane puzzled over what to do, the closer his mother was getting to just barging right in. I can't believe this is happening. Amane did have an idea, but he didn't like it. I'm sorry, Sheena, but could you please hide in my bedroom? Huh, what? Take your stuff with you, and once I find some way to get my mom outside, you can go back home. I'm really sorry, but please? With no other viable option, Amane took the helm and steered Mahiru into concealing herself. Thankfully, they'd already finished cleaning up after lunch, so that wouldn't be a giveaway. If he hid her shoes in the shoe closet, they wouldn't be discovered, and Mahiru could just bring her personal effects into Amane's room. The plan was to let Amane's mom to make a quick inspection of the apartment while Mahiru was hiding. Amane would mention to his mother that he really wanted to eat her home cooking, something that'd probably keep her too busy to push her way into his room. Whatever it took, Amane had to keep his mother from breaching the bedroom. He would purposely request that his mother cook something that used an ingredient he didn't have in his refrigerator. If the two of them went out shopping together, that would provide Mahiru with a window to escape. Amane hurriedly explained to Mahiru that such a scheme was the only option as he handed her his extra key and asked her to cooperate with the greatest sincerity he could muster. Oh okay, she said, nodding in bewilderment. In truth, the storage room was also an option, but Amane didn't want a girl to wait in there. It had no heating, which meant it was quite cold this time of year. Amane's bedroom had a proper heater, as well as soft cushions. It wouldn't do to have Mahiru sitting on a bare floor while she shivered from the cold. All right, I'm counting on you. I have to deal with my mom, so. Even before meeting his mother, Amane looked dejected. He headed for the entrance while Mahiru quietly slipped into the bedroom. After making sure that the angel was hidden, Amane reluctantly opened the front door. My goodness Amane, that took you long enough. I'm glad to see you're looking well. I was starting to wonder if you were asleep. There was Amane's mother, standing just outside his apartment. He hadn't seen her since summer break. Although she was a parent, it would have been difficult to tell from her looks alone. It wasn't just that her face looked young, she never acted her age, either. She wore the same sort of happy expression she often had back when Amane was still living at home. Yeah, I'm perfectly fine, so how about heading home? How can you say that to your own mother? It took me several hours to get here, you know? Don't I even get a thank you? Thank you very much for traveling a great distance, now please go home. Come now, don't say such things. It's not very endearing. You should act more like Shudo, your father. Men don't need to be endearing, do we? While Amane had spat his words acidly, his mother, Shihoko, didn't seem bothered at all, instead breaking into a fit of laughter. You've really hit your rebellious phase, she said. I hope you're not planning on having me stand outside all day. I'm coming in, okay? Wait, nobody said you could. Have you forgotten that your father and I pay the rent on this place? There was nothing Amane could do to argue or refuse his mother once she'd played that card. Reluctantly, he allowed her to enter. To keep her from going into the bedroom, Amane casually guided his mother to walk past the bedroom door and into the living room. By the way, you really should tell me beforehand when you plan on visiting, said Amane. Now, I wouldn't be able to get a proper picture of my son's living situation if I didn't show up unannounced, would I? Shihoko replied. Ugh, look, there's no problem, okay? I'm keeping the place clean. You certainly are, I'm surprised. You never kept your room clean at home, but you're doing better than I'd expected. I'm surprised. Shihoko nodded seriously, looking genuinely astonished as she surveyed the living room. The unspoken truth was that his place was only clean because Mahiru had helped Amane tidy up. Her advice and constant scolding was a big part of how his place had managed to stay clean, too. Really, Mahiru deserved most of the credit, but there was no way Amane was going to tell his mother that now. Your skin looks good, too, you must be eating well, Shihoko observed. Yeah, Amane admitted, unable to meet his mother's eyes. Even his improved health was something he owed to the angel. You're even cooking properly, huh? Oh, but it looks like you're cooking for two. Shihoko's manicured finger was pointing at his dish rack. Two people had eaten lunch, so naturally there were two sets of dishes. Carelessly, Amane had forgotten to put them away. He should have remembered how perceptive his mother could be. Yeah, I had a friend over. Amane's answer was not quite a lie. He'd spoken as indifferently as he was able, doing his best to stop himself from shaking. It was fair to say that he and Mahiru had built up to something resembling a friendship, so it wasn't exactly untrue. There was the small matter of hiding that the friend in question was a girl. Shihoko replied with a tone that suggested she didn't really accept that explanation at face value. She scanned the living room again. I suppose you get a passing mark. You're doing so well, I can hardly believe you're a boy living on his own, Amane's mother finally conceded. Somehow, Amane had been able to deceive her, though only just barely. Strangely, he felt a chill run down his spine, and he was sweating bullets. On the other hand, maybe he shouldn't have been so surprised to have passed his mother's inspection. Mahiru really had turned some things around for him, after all. See, there was nothing for you to worry about, Mom. I suppose not, though I can hardly believe it. You could barely do anything for yourself at home. You've certainly grown up. I'm basically an adult, Amane replied, though inwardly, he scoffed at himself for having the audacity to say such a thing. Good job, Shihoko praised, smiling. It made Amane a little uncomfortable to hear that, since of course he hadn't done any of it on his own. There was no way he could risk telling his mother the truth, however, so he would have to leave things as they were and try to get her out of there. She's pretty much finished her evaluation, right? I wonder if I can get her to leave without saying anything about wanting to eat her cooking or whatever, Amane thought. That just leaves the bedroom check, I suppose, Shihoko mused nonchalantly. Amane's eyes went wide at the drop of that bomb. Mahiru was still in there. If his mother found a girl hiding in the bedroom, a far greater disaster would ensue than if Amane had just revealed Mahiru from the get-go. Hey, don't joke around. Even if you're my mom, I don't want you digging around in my bedroom. Oh? Something in there you're feeling embarrassed about? Shihoko prodded. There's probably one or two embarrassing things in any high school guy's room, if you think about it. So you admit it? Yeah, I admit it. Please don't go in there. Even though it was shameful, there'd been no other choice. Amane had been forced to go along with his mother's assumption to keep her from entering the bedroom. If she discovered Mahiru in Amane's room, she would most assuredly get the wrong idea. For both his own sake and Mahiru's, Amane needed to avoid that at all costs. When Amane's mother saw him blocking the door to his room, desperately trying to keep her from getting through, she could tell right away that he was hiding something. Closing in on her son, Shihoko said, I suppose you are grown up, if you're hiding those sorts of things from your parents. If it came down to it, Amane was prepared to keep his mom out by force if necessary, though he admittedly didn't like that idea. He stood ready to stop her, but then, thump, there came a noise from inside the bedroom. Amane. Yes. What are you hiding? It has nothing to do with you, Mom. So you say. A wide grin spread across Shihoko's face. It was the kind of coercive smile that could not be denied. Amane became extremely uncomfortable every time she looked at him like this. It had a way of sapping his willpower to oppose her. Amane groaned, and Shihoko saw an opening. She put her hand on the doorknob to his room, and by the time Amane noticed, it was far too late. Shihoko slipped past Amane, intent on discovering the source of the noise on the other side of the door. What met her eyes beyond that barrier that Amane had failed to protect was the figure of a beautiful girl. She was leaning her back against the side of the bed while hugging a cushion to her chest. The girl's eyes were closed, and her breaths were a gentle rhythm. Mahiru had dozed off by the time Shihoko discovered her. A warm room with a heater running and a full stomach after lunch were the perfect conditions for an afternoon nap. Amane couldn't help but wonder whether Mahiru often slept in boys' rooms, but all this really confirmed was that she found Amane to be harmless enough to doze off in his bedroom. He couldn't exactly blame her for it. Sitting motionless so as not to make any noise had probably gotten real boring real fast. The main problem was, obviously, Shihoko, who had arrived at just the wrong moment to witness a situation she was sure to misunderstand. Had he been the third party, Amane would have gotten the wrong idea, too. He would have assumed they were so intimate that Mahiru had no problem drifting off for a nap in his room. Grimacing all the while, Amane glanced over at his mother and saw that her eyes were sparkling. He could only imagine the commotion she was about to raise. Oh my, Amane, you've got such an adorable girlfriend. Shihoko shrieked in her youthful voice. This isn't the kind of girl you can just hide away in a corner, you know. Amane felt a headache coming on. She had immediately jumped to possibly the worst conclusion available, and to make matters worse, she was clearly very excited about the idea that her son was dating such a lovely girl. There was no doubt that even Amane's mother was smitten with Mahiru's beauty. Mahiru looked so vulnerable when she was asleep. The practiced air of elegant refinement that she always wore like a mask had melted away, revealing the full captivating nature of her looks. Her cute face had never looked more peaceful or more pretty. Amane had grown somewhat accustomed to Mahiru's appearance, but seeing her like this, he was once again struck by her incredible charm. Her cherubic face held such an innocent serenity. Once again, he felt the urge to reach out and touch her. Her sleeping figure, hugging Amane's cushion tight, awakened many desires in him that were best kept private. This truly captivating girl was Amane's girlfriend, or so his mother thought. It was no wonder she was excited. I suppose the reason you didn't want your mother looking in this room is because your girlfriend is here? Look at you, growing up right before my eyes. That's not it. You've got it all wrong. She's not my girlfriend or anything. Come now, you don't have to make excuses. Your mother has no intention of opposing your relationship, Amane. No, I'm telling you, that's not the issue here. We're not in a romantic relationship. You've got it totally wrong. Well, whether I'm right or wrong, she's in your bedroom right now, isn't she? That's because you showed up all of a sudden. We were just hanging out in the living room, but I knew you would misunderstand. You see, the problem with that excuse is that you would never let a girl you don't like into your apartment. And I really don't think a girl would just waltz right on into the apartment of someone she didn't like, would she? Amane struggled to find a way to argue the issue. His mother was right. Amane was awfully territorial about his living spaces and wasn't inclined to let just anyone into his domain. The first time Mahiru had come in, she'd practically forced her way, but ever since then, he'd welcomed her over, even when she wasn't coming to cook for him. I guess that means I really do like her. As far as Amane was concerned, he was sure he liked Mahiru for her personality, not her appearance. He enjoyed that seemingly contradictory part to her. There was a biting and honest side of her that she didn't show at school, and yet she found it hard to be open about her feelings. He liked her curt and annoyingly helpful attitude and the reserved way she conducted herself. When she was taken by surprise, she would get flustered, and the mask would drop momentarily, which was another thing he enjoyed. Most of all, Amane especially liked that rare angelic smile that he'd only seen cross her face a few times. He supposed that each of those attributes were all precious parts of Mahiru's appeal. If he had to say whether that was a feeling of romantic love, Amane would have insisted that it was something else, but he couldn't deny that Mahiru was a wonderful girl for many reasons. I care about her as a friend. Not every relationship between members of the opposite sex has to be romantic, you know. And I'm pretty sure she doesn't feel that way, either. Amane was not the kind of mama's boy who would obediently play along with whatever Shihoko said. Plus, Mahiru would certainly object to the suggestion that she had feelings for him. Now, you don't know that, Amane. Aren't you being rather presumptuous, thinking you know exactly what her heart wants? What can I say to get you to understand that our relationship is not like that, Mom? Sheena, please, help me out here. No matter how he tried to explain, Amane's mother had already made up her mind. Amane pressed a finger to his forehead, stumped on what to do. With all possible urgency, he wished Mahiru would just wake up. And then, either Amane's unspoken prayer had been heard or all the ruckus had, because Mahiru's eyelids fluttered open, and she made a sweet noise as she raised her face. Her flaxen hair slipped over her shoulders. The girl's shining eyes, the color of caramel, were blurry with sleep, and she looked so vulnerable that it felt somehow wrong to look directly at her. Maybe she wasn't quite fully awake yet as she looked up at Amane vacantly, her eyes still relaxed and drowsy. Amane pointedly stared in another direction. Sheena, I don't mind that you fell asleep, but there's been a misunderstanding, so please help me clear things up. Misunderstanding? Hey, Miss Girlfriend, what's your name? Mahiru was still clearly confused over what had happened, but Shihoko didn't hesitate to approach her, beaming with an amiable, carefree smile and an overly familiar demeanor. Mahiru was visibly flustered, still trying to get her bearings. It's important to tell each other our names when we first meet, you know. I am Mahiru Sheena. Oh, Mahiru, what a cute name that is. I am Shihoko, please don't be shy. And call me by my first name, okay? Mahiru had reflexively given her name when pressed for it. She looked up at Amane, her eyes begging him for rescue. Unfortunately, Amane was helpless. He had been hoping Mahiru would save him somehow. Regretfully, he shook his head. He knew that once his mother got started, there was really no stopping her. She was set on learning more about Mahiru, and nothing would dissuade her now. It was unlikely she'd ever realize just how uncomfortable she was making the poor girl. All right, Mrs., that is, Shihoko, see? That sounds more like my daughter-in-law. Fujimiya. That could be referring to either of us, you know? Right, Amane? Mom, you're bothering Sheena. Amane, you mustn't be so formal with your sweet new girlfriend, call her by her first name. Shihoko didn't seem inclined to listen to anything anyone said. Amane scowled at her, but she didn't show any sign of letting up. Her smile was wide and utterly shameless. Shihoko? Yes, dear? He and I. Why, I don't know who you mean. He who? Amane and I, we aren't dating. Even though she was obviously flustered by his mother's verbal assault, Mahiru tried her best to set the record straight. Unfortunately, she'd looked right at Amane and had even been forced to call him by his first name, which was apparently exactly what Shihoko had been after. The older woman's smile grew even wider. Well, I suppose it takes time for things like this to blossom. Something to look forward to, Shihoko said, quite presumptuously. That's not, Mahiru said, trying to object. Oh no, I must have intruded just when things were getting good. I want you to let me explain properly. I don't have that kind of relationship with Amane. We were just having lunch together because Amane can't cook. What a wonderful bride you'll make, sweetie. My Amane set out to live on his own even though he's incapable of doing any kind of housework, you see. So I really do appreciate you supporting him. No, Mahiru had put up a heroic effort, but she may as well have been banging her head against a wall at this point. The moment she'd mentioned visiting Amane's place, cooking there, and sitting at the same table as him, the sparkle in Shihoko's eyes had changed. The pushy mother somehow looked even more unhinged than usual to Amane. Once Shihoko got like this, he knew there was nothing he could do to stop her. The only person who ever stood a chance was his father, Shudo. Sheena, just give up. My mother won't listen to anyone when she gets like this. You can't be serious, Mahiru sounded extremely dismayed. Amane realized that they weren't getting anywhere. Trying to explain the situation wasn't working, and he clearly couldn't stop his mother's wild speculations. At any rate, my Amane did quite well to snag such a beauty. I'm surprised. With Amane exhausted from arguing, and Mahiru having no clear idea what to do, both simply went quiet. It was possible Amane's mother took their sudden silence as a sign of agreement, though Shihoko had doubtlessly already assumed that their embarrassment was proof enough of her suspicions. She was looking at Mahiru with no attempt to hide the wild curiosity in her eyes. What do you think, Mahiru? Can my Amane really make it, living on his own? That's... Well, Mahiru stammered. Enough to stay alive, you should have just said I'll be fine. Amane interjected. I remember the place being pretty bad, Mahiru reminded him. Don't bring that up. I'm keeping it clean now, aren't I? And I've been helping you with the cleaning this whole time, haven't I? That's true, and I'm grateful for it, Amane admitted. All of it, truly, the food, the cleaning, and everything else. Mahiru was inarguably the reason that he'd been able to live so comfortably, and he would bow down in thanks to her without any hesitation. He knew that she wouldn't have done so. Much if she'd hated it, but he always strove to make his appreciation known. As should have been expected by now, Amane's mother interpreted the exchange in a different light. Well now, Amane, so it wasn't just today's lunch. Mahiru's been doing everything for you this whole time, you useless child. The way you speak to each other, it's like you're already living together. No. How did you even reach that conclusion? We only live next to each other. Amane fired back. Aha, so it was fate. Isn't that wonderful, Amane? You got me such a beautiful daughter-in-law. I'm not denying that she's beautiful and talented, but I'm totally against calling it fate or destiny or whatever. Doesn't it sound more romantic that way? That's not what I'm bothered by. I'm telling you we don't have a romantic relationship at all. How persistent. Clearly, Shihoko was choosing to believe that Amane was still too embarrassed to admit the truth. Amane's face contorted into a progressively deeper grimace, and he heaved his heaviest sigh of the last few months. He couldn't recall how many times he'd suffered at the hands of his mother's wild imagination. Shihoko was really the kind of woman who just did whatever she wanted. As for Mahiru, the one who'd been caught unawares by the full weight of Shihoko's overwhelming enthusiasm, she could do little else than look helplessly back and forth between Amane and his mother, utterly bewildered. Mahiru, this is probably a parent's love talking, but my Amane isn't very good with words, and he isn't very upfront about his feelings, but he is faithful and gentlemanly. I'd say he's a pretty good catch. Plus, he doesn't have any experience with girls, so you'll be able to get him to do whatever you want. What on earth are you saying, Mom? Seriously, cut it out. That last bit especially is none of her business, Amane thought angrily. I mean, it's true, isn't it? If not, then why haven't you had any other girlfriends? You resemble your father, so I don't think it's your looks. Maybe it's because you're a little immature. It's none of your business. You really should try harder to act cool in front of Mahiru, you know. I will not, and she's not interested, either, Amane protested. Oh, come now. Sweetie, you can train him to suit your own preferences, you know. Amane cleans up pretty good if you dress him up. Shihoko, grinning madly, struck poor Mahiru again, who could do nothing but offer a vague sort of smile in return. Not even an angel could retaliate in a battle like this. Amane's mother was truly something else. Mom, you're bothering her. Please go home. What a big man you've become, telling your mother to go home. I'm serious, please. It's really obvious that you're making her uncomfortable. Oh? Is that true, Mahiru? Don't ask her, she'll definitely just say what you want to hear. Just this once, please head back. You can come back some other time. Well, if you're going that far, I suppose I get the message. I did barge in while you were alone with your girlfriend, after all. It's only natural you'd be upset to lose your alone time. Fine, you can explain it however you like. Just hurry up and go. Amane was beyond tired of arguing with his mother, and this whole situation had to be taking a toll on Mahiru as well. He looked over and saw that she also looked exhausted. Vowing internally to shower her with appreciation later, Amane shooed his mother away and got a look of sour disapproval in return. Even so, Shihoko didn't make an effort to stay, so at least she kind of cared, though it was obvious her view of reality was still quite different. Ah, Mahiru, let's exchange contact information, shall we? I want a full report later on how Amane's doing, among other things. Oh okay. In a last-ditch effort, Shihoko tried to sink her hooks in again. Caught in the woman's powerful momentum, Mahiru wound up exchanging contact information with her. Now Amane's mother would be able to reach her directly. The thought made Amane want to press a hand to his forehead. Beaming wide, Shihoko gripped Mahiru's hand and reminded the girl to look after her son. Amane resolved to send his father a message later, asking him to rein Shihoko in. I'm exhausted. Sorry, she's like a hurricane. Shihoko hadn't stayed all that long, but she'd left the two completely ragged. After slumping down on the couch, Amane put his head in his hands and sighed deeply. Mahiru gingerly took a seat, too, but her usually perfect posture was bent and haggard. Amane had thought that the angel could handle anyone, but even she had no energy left after the encounter with his mother. He was unsure if he should try to apologize. I really didn't want to let her go home still believing the wrong thing, Amane admitted. Well, there's no real harm done, Mahiru said. No, I think there is. If she was acting like that, it probably means that she's taken a liking to you. One way or another, she's gonna be an issue. It was truly unfortunate that this was going to put a burden on Mahiru. Shihoko's love for all things adorable, coupled with her mistaking Mahiru for her son's girlfriend, almost certainly meant that Amane's mother would be finding new ways to poke her nose where it didn't belong in the days to come. Trouble was on the horizon. Shihoko really cares about you a lot, doesn't she? That's a nice way to put it, but sometimes she really just refuses to listen. More than just an overly affectionate parent, Shihoko doted and fawned on Amane even though he hated it. He knew he shouldn't complain too much, since it was probably at least partly his own fault because he was such hopeless slob. It wasn't as though he was ungrateful for all his mother had provided, but she could be a real pain in the butt, and he wished she'd give him more space. How nice, Mahiru mumbled quietly. Amane looked up at her. What is? Your mother is quite a character but also very kind. That means she's loud and loves to meddle. Even so, I think it's nice. Mahiru's words weren't an empty compliment, she really did seem envious as she mumbled and averted her eyes. A gloomy expression was plain on the girl's face. So much so that Amane thought she might break down into tears at the drop of a hat. Anyone could have sensed how fragile she was right now. It was clearly more than simple exhaustion. Mahiru must have noticed Amane looking at her, because she suddenly looked up and forced her lips into a small smile. Then, just as quickly, she regained her usual composure and leaned back against the sofa, something she rarely did. Mahiru, huh? What are you saying all of a sudden? Nothing. I was just thinking that it's been a while since anyone called me by my first name. Most people only address me by my family name. It was pretty surprising to know that someone who seemed as popular as Mahiru didn't actually have any friends close enough to call her by her first name. Everyone at school saw her as a flawless angel. Even Mahiru's acquaintances probably maintained some degree of formality with her, and nobody had the courage to really get to know her. A lot of students only ever addressed her by a nickname that Mahiru herself didn't even like. Well, I guess if you don't have any close friends, that would leave only your parents, right? Amane asked. My parents would never talk to me that way. Absolutely not. Mahiru's reply was cold. Looking her over, Amane saw that Mahiru's face was an expressionless mask. She resembled a beautiful doll, completely devoid of feeling. That, too, only lasted a second, however, and Mahiru's visage changed again when she noticed that Amane was looking at her. Her eyebrows lowered, as if she was troubled by something. Anyway, it doesn't happen often, she muttered, before letting out a sigh. Amane had been wondering for a while if Mahiru had a bad relationship with her parents. It had been easy enough to imagine that she had problems at home from her frosty demeanor whenever he touched on the subject. Plus, she never went out to eat with her parents and hated her own birthdays, but Amane never would have thought Mahiru's parents were so distant as to not even call the girl by her first name. Thinking back to how Mahiru had quietly said she enjoyed Shihoko's personality, Amane wondered how the angel must have felt in that moment. Mahiru. Rather suddenly, Amane blurted out the word. He'd never called his neighbor by her first name before. The girl in question blinked her caramel eyes. She looked stunned, and Amane could tell that he'd caught her off guard. The momentary surprise had revealed a youthfulness about Mahiru that she normally kept hidden. It's your name. Someone ought to call you by it, Amane reasoned. I suppose you're right, Mahiru answered bluntly. A few moments later, a tiny smile appeared. Amane's chest felt fluttery when he spotted it. Amane. When he heard her small voice pronounce his own first name, the flutter turned to a storm. Maybe it was because, until just a moment ago, his mom was the one calling him by his first name, but when Mahiru called him by his first name face to face, he felt the uneasy, impatient stirring in his chest churn and roar. Please don't call me that outside, okay? Mahiru reminded. I already wasn't planning to. That goes for you, too. Don't slip up outside the apartment. Understood. It's our secret, right? Amane couldn't bring himself to look directly at Mahiru, as she was still grinning a little. Looking away, he responded in agreement and shifted in his seat, turning away to escape the angel's smile. Though Shihoko's Saturday invasion had been a nightmare, nothing much had changed aside from how Amane and Mahiru referred to each other. They hadn't suddenly become any closer. Addressing each other a little more directly wasn't a big deal. At most, perhaps Mahiru's demeanor had softened a little, but that was it. Amane? Mahiru had come over earlier than usual for dinner on Sunday, perhaps feeling a little uneasy, because she looked troubled. Amane was glad to let her in, but he was confused by her peculiar attitude. He'd thought that maybe using their first names didn't sit right with her after all, but when the time had come, she'd said his name without hesitation, so there must have been something else bothering her. For the time being, they sat on the sofa together, and as he waited to see what Mahiru would do, she pulled a handkerchief from her skirt pocket. As Amane continued to wonder what was up, Mahiru opened the neatly folded handkerchief to reveal a tarnished silver key. It must have been the one he'd given her the day before. I'm returning your spare key. In the end, I never got the chance to use it, and then I forgot to give it back. I'm very sorry about that. I see. Apparently, Mahiru hadn't been able to rest until she'd returned the key. Satisfied that he understood the cause for her strange behavior, Amane stared at the bit of metal resting on the handkerchief. Now that he thought about it, Mahiru came over to fix dinner in his apartment almost every night. Usually, he met her at the door, but sometimes it took him a while. There'd even been times where Mahiru had been forced to wait because he wasn't home. It must have been inconvenient for her to have to wait outside for him, especially during these colder months. Somewhere, Amane had heard that chilly weather was a girl's worst enemy, and now that he thought about it, he wouldn't have been too happy waiting in the cold, either, had the situation been reversed. Since Mahiru was basically coming over every day, he wondered if it wouldn't be easier for her to have a key to get in. That's fine, I think you should keep it, he said. Huh? You can give it back to me whenever we stop spending time together. It seemed perfectly reasonable to Amane. Now that Mahiru had the key, she might as well keep it, but she didn't seem convinced. I mean, going to the door every time you come over is a hassle. Ah, so that's what this is about. I doubt you're going to misuse it or anything. Well, that's true, but Amane had been sharing meals with Mahiru for more than a month now, and he figured that he knew her pretty well. She was sensible, considerate, and kind. He was certain that she would never hand the key over to anyone else or do anything while Amane wasn't around. If there was anyone he could trust, it was Mahiru. Besides, you must think it's a pain to have to ring the buzzer and wait out there all the time, Amane said. Even if it is, I feel like you're being a bit careless. But I'm giving it to you because I trust you. At that, Mahiru's eyes went wide, and she floundered for words. Confusion, along with something else that Amane didn't really understand, passed over the girl's delicate features. The truth of it was that Amane had only wanted her to have the key to save himself some trouble, but if she really hated the idea, he was prepared to back down. As for Mahiru, she looked intently back and forth between Amane and the key for a few moments, then finally let out a gentle sigh. Understood. I'll hold on to it. You know, I'm never sure if something is a big deal to you, or if you even care at all, Amane, Mahiru jabbed with a slightly prickly tone. She sounded fed up, and Amane couldn't do anything but smile wryly. Suits me well, don't you think? You shouldn't say things like that about yourself, Mahiru admonished. Amane's smile grew wider. Mahiru seemed to be growing more comfortable with this kind of silly back and forth. They were now on a first-name basis, of course. It would have been strange if they hadn't built up some kind of rapport. While Mahiru's eyes were still full of exasperation, as if to say that Amane was really a hopeless case, her gaze wasn't cold. In fact, there was a noticeable bit of warmth to it. She understood that Amane was just joking around. All right then, I won't hesitate to use this. I might even do something to your apartment without telling you. Like what? Like, a surprise cleaning. I would be grateful for that. Or how about if your fridge was suddenly packed full of food? It'd make breakfast easier, and we'd have more options for dinner, too. Mahiru's idea of a prank clearly needed some work. Amane would have been glad to suffer under any one of her suggestions. That she couldn't come up with a real threat even when she truly tried only reminded Amane of Mahiru's gentle nature. It was quite charming and brought a smile to his lips. Are you sure you're not making fun of me? Mahiru looked like she ready to pout, which would have been cute in its own right, but Amane didn't want to upset Mahiru any further. Suppressing the grin that threatened to break out, Amane said, "Course not." Chapter 11 A Reward for the Angel. Well, guess that's how it goes, Amane grumbled as he looked the list of names up and down. The rankings for the previous week's tests were out, so Amane had shown up to check them like the rest of his class. Coming in at 21st, Amane was situated around his usual score. It was a good enough ranking but hardly a result that stood out. He hadn't found this exam any more challenging than previous ones, though it was still a relief to see he'd done as well as he'd expected. Surprising no one, Mahiru reigned over all the rest from her typical first-place position. She truly was a genius, but Amane knew perfectly well that she didn't attain that position without applying herself. Amane had often seen her studying after dinner. He wasn't about to argue that Mahiru wasn't smart, but he felt confident that it was the hard work that put her at the top more than anything else. Sheena is first again, huh? Of course she is. The angel's on a whole different level. Such proclamations caused Amane to make a sour face. What's with that look? Was your rank that bad? Itsuki came over, puzzled by his friend's odd expression. Only the top 50 test scores had been posted. As such, Itsuki hadn't come to see his own score, but rather, to accompany Amane. It's nothing. I'm 21st. Oh? Isn't that better than last time? Only by a little. Gotta consider the margin of error. Whoa, you clever people even speak differently compared with us. Common folk. Itsuki grinned. Yeah. Amane ignored his friend's sarcasm and turned back to the class rankings. He knew Mahiru really gave it her all when it came to studying. She didn't like all that effort to show, however, so she worked tirelessly in secret to make her success look like it came naturally. Others might have praised her or called her a genius, but since they didn't know about all the behind-the-scenes struggling, they couldn't recognize her actual accomplishments. That must have been an oppressive way for Mahiru to live. I should at least do something, Amane whispered. What did you say? Nothing. Come on, let's go back to class. Huh? What's this, Amane? Mahiru had gone to the supermarket and returned with dinner ingredients. When she'd started to put them in the refrigerator, a conspicuously unfamiliar white box had caught her eye. It's a cake. It was likely that Mahiru already had an inkling as to the box's contents based on its shape, but she'd gone ahead and asked anyway. Amane had gone to a patisserie that Chitos talked about a lot on social media to buy the cake. Do you like cake? Mahiru asked. Not really. I bought it for you. What? Why? I thought it would be nice as a little celebration, because you were top of our year on the test. It's to congratulate you. Mahiru quickly blinked a few times, unable to process that the cake was for her. She looked quite taken aback. But I get top rank every time, so it's not really something to celebrate, she protested. Well, you're always working hard, so I thought it might be nice to get a reward for once. It's a shortcake. I hope you like that. Huh? I mean, I don't hate it or anything, great. Have some after dinner. While Mahiru still looked a bit troubled, Amane cut the conversation off there. He'd decided that it would be best to act like this was no big deal, since Mahiru always seemed troubled when people treated her like she was special. Mahiru was the type of person who would exhaust herself taking care of someone else but then neglect herself. Amane had never once seen the girl do anything enjoyable for her own sake, and whenever anyone praised her or showed appreciation, she'd just redouble her efforts and run herself down. Simply put, Mahiru was not good at accepting kindness from others. Amane hadn't known her for all that long, but he was sure that much was true. That's why he wanted to return just a little bit of the kindness she was always showing him. Amane smiled again as Mahiru got everything ready in the kitchen and began cooking for that night. After dinner, Mahiru put the cake on a plate and brought it over to the coffee table with a nervous expression. Amane couldn't help but chuckle at the sight. Why are you laughing? Nothing. Don't worry about it. It doesn't seem like nothing. It's fine, stop worrying. Amane found it amusing that Mahiru was acting so stiff, but his laughter clearly bothered her. He was supposed to be showing her some appreciation, not making fun of her, so Amane quickly shut up. Mahiru set the cake and the coffee she had brought along with it on the low table, then sat down on the sofa. Her movements were still slightly stilted, and Amane felt another fit of laughter coming on, but Mahiru was sitting next to him now, so he did his best to quash the temptation. A shy look in her eyes, Mahiru glanced up at Amane. Right, so congratulations, he said. Thank you very much. But it's fine, just enjoy it. You worked hard. That's true, but come on, eat up. Even you should treat yourself to something nice once in a while. The deed was done, and the cake was already here. Mahiru couldn't object to that. She gave a small nod before picking up the plate of cake and a fork. Very well, then I will gratefully accept this, she said. Please go ahead. With a nimble wave, Mahiru cut the cake into bite-sized pieces with her fork and cautiously tried some. Amane imagined that girls were naturally very picky about their sweets, but since he'd gotten the cake from one of Chitos's favorite shops, he was fairly confident it was a good choice. He knew his hunch was correct when he saw Mahiru's eyes widen slightly when she put the cake in her mouth, then the corners of her mouth relaxed slightly. Usually, Mahiru's expressions really didn't change all that much, but recently, she'd become a bit more animated, or perhaps it was that Amane had gotten better at reading her emotions. The mellow, carefree face that Mahiru let show as she slowly savored her cake was one she made only while eating. Is something wrong? She must have noticed Amane staring, and he quickly looked away. No, nothing, he answered hastily. Now it was Mahiru's turn to stare at Amane. Suddenly, she snatched up the fork again, as if an idea had just struck her. She stabbed one bite of cake and held it out toward Amane in a suggestive way. In other words, she was offering to feed him. Oh, no, thanks, I didn't really want any, Amane protested. Really? Mahiru asked. No, well, if it's all right, I guess I'll have some, but, Amane certainly hadn't expected this development. At a loss, he reflexively agreed. A beautiful girl, hand-feeding him cake. For many adolescent boys, it would be a dream come true. Unfortunately, Amane's shyness prevented him from enjoying the situation as much as he would have liked. You're the one who bought it in the first place, Amane, so you've got to have some, too. Mahiru seemed entirely unaware of any of the implications behind her gesture. She maintained an ordinary, clueless expression as she held the cake out toward his mouth. There was no way he could turn her down, so Amane steeled himself and bit down. An incredibly sugary flavor instantly hit him. This is crazy sweet, he said. Well, it is cake. That wasn't what Amane had really been getting at, but Mahiru remained oblivious. Sweetness spread through Amane's mouth as he chewed, but he was too preoccupied with something else to appreciate the flavor. This really doesn't seem weird to you, does it? Amane questioned in a low voice. He was practically gagging on sweetness and shame, and Mahiru was acting like this was all quite normal. Amane snatched the fork from Mahiru's hand and held out a bite of cake to her in the same way she'd done for him. Turnabout is fair play, right? Mahiru hesitated. Eat it, Amane insisted, his tone surprisingly forceful. Mahiru looked even more confused. Perhaps knowing that she'd started this, she decided to play along and timidly took a quick bite. The action reminded Amane of a small bird nipping at something. Amane stared at Mahiru as she chewed, and gradually, a change came over her. At first, she just looked entirely bewildered, but as her mouth moved, a slight redness spread across Mahiru's face. By the time she swallowed the cake, there was no hiding her obvious embarrassment. Mahiru's usually milk-white cheeks now resembled apples, and her eyes were shimmering, slightly blurred with tears. "So what do you think?" Amane asked. "It's delicious. Not that. What do you think about being fed?" Surely Mahiru understood now how Amane had felt earlier, and her eyes shifted down to look at the floor while she trembled faintly. "I feel very much like running away." "I bet you do. That's exactly the sort of thing that might give people the wrong idea, you know. Save it for your female friends, okay?" Amane turned away sharply to emphasize his point. "Okay," Mahiru replied with a voice that was barely above a whisper. She'd probably only fed Amane so easily because she trusted him. Mahiru hadn't meant any harm by it, of course, but it was still troublesome. A stubborn sweetness still clung to the inside of Amane's mouth. Guess someone feeling too safe around you can be its own kind of problem. In the end, Mahiru curled up into a ball next to Amane, looking slightly embarrassed as she let a small sigh escape. Chapter 12 Cooking Classes with the Angel. Amane usually bought something to eat for lunch at school, but on days off, that wasn't possible. He and Mahiru each had their own errands to take care of, so it was impossible to eat both lunch and dinner together. Even if it had been doable, Amane would have felt supremely guilty asking Mahiru to make and eat 2 meals with him. Usually, Amane only needed to handle his weekend lunches himself, but if he made too frequent use of the convenience store, Mahiru would scold him, saying something like, "You need to eat a properly balanced diet." With the costs of his dinners piling up, Amane also felt awkward about going out to eat for lunch. What to do for his midday meal was quickly becoming an issue. "I wonder if I should cook something?" Without any errands that would take Amane out of the house, he sat at home by himself. Noon was only an hour away. Mahiru had likely already gotten started making something for herself, but the same could not be said for her hapless neighbor. When it came down to it, Amane could make something if he really had to. It wasn't like in manga where he'd churn out some censored blob. While it wouldn't look particularly fantastic and might not taste spectacular, the food Amane was capable of creating was edible. It wasn't exactly cooking, but it was close enough, and it kept him fed. The problem was that he'd grown accustomed to Mahiru's top-rate meals, so the idea of going back to his own dishes was not particularly appealing. Nobody would want to go back to such plain fare after sampling such delicious works of art. "Ugh, Mahiru really spoils me." Amane had become a slave to Mahiru's cooking. He felt ashamed at the thought of going out to eat again, but he'd also lost interest in convenience store meals. Deciding that he'd been depending on Mahiru too much, Amane concluded this was a good time to challenge himself. Even though he'd failed when it came to preparing his own meals thus far, Mahiru wouldn't be with him forever, after all. Things between them were nice and reliable for now, but there were still 2 years of high school left, so if anything happened during that time, this relationship of theirs might come to an abrupt end. What's more, they would surely go their separate ways when it came time for college. There was no way things would simply go on like this indefinitely. "I guess I'd better try to put in a little effort now, while I still have her around." Resolving to do something, even if it was relatively minor, Amane stood up from the sofa and grabbed his wallet. "Oh, did you go to the supermarket?" On his way back from the store, Amane ran into Mahiru in the apartment lobby. He wasn't sure if the coincidental meeting was good or bad. Mahiru looked like she'd also just gone out, because she was carrying a shopping bag from the nearby stationery store. "Yeah," Amane admitted. There was no need to hide it, so Amane waved his supermarket bags to show her. With a curious expression, Mahiru asked, "Oh, was the shopping from yesterday not enough? Didn't you buy everything on the list?" "And no, that's not it. It's just, I thought I might try making lunch on my own," he said. "On your own?" Despite the explanation, Mahiru's eyes seemed full of doubt. It was only natural. Before becoming dependent on Mahiru's cooking, Amane had survived by buying pre-made meals and convenience store lunches. It must have been difficult for her to believe that he was really going to cook for himself. I don't want to say anything mean, Mahiru continued, so I'll just tell you it would be safer for you to stop now. What if you burn yourself or get a cut? You know, it's not like I literally can't cook anything at all. Right, it's just that you can't cook anything that tastes good. And that's assuming you don't kill yourself in the process. Mahiru's thorough dressing down left Amane speechless. She'd said exactly what he himself had been thinking. If you say you're going ahead with it, I won't stop you, Mahiru said, but manage your expectations, or you'll end up severely disappointed. Fair enough, Amane conceded. By expectations she must have been referring to her own cooking. Mahiru was confident in her abilities, and she was well aware how much Amane enjoyed her food. It's just that, well, you're always talking about nutrition and stuff. There might be some time in the future when I really have to live on my own, like college. I can't rely on you forever, right? Overdependence on Mahiru only spelled trouble for Amane. After realizing how much Mahiru had been spoiling him lately, he felt like he ought to be able to at least manage the basics. Mahiru's eyes went wide at Amane's words, then she let out a sigh that sounded just the slightest bit impressed. I think it's a great thing to set your eyes on the future, but if you're going to do that, shouldn't you have come to me first, she posed. Huh? Rather than making whatever kind of mess you're about to do without my supervision, it would be much better for me to watch and ensure nothing goes wrong. Amane, are you confident that you won't accidentally destroy your kitchen? No. Amane sighed. He knew he made a terrible mess of his kitchen whenever he tried to use it. With no rebuttal, he gave Mahiru a slow nod. It figures, Mahiru replied stolidly. That's why it's better for me to be there, right? Would that be asking too much? If I didn't want to do it, I wouldn't have suggested the idea. Her voice had a bit of a cold edge to it, but since she was agreeing to help him, Amane didn't mind. He bowed deeply to express his gratitude. You don't need to be so formal, Mahiru said, sounding flustered. Amane smiled, and the two stepped into the elevator, taking it up to their floor. By the way, do you have an apron? Mahiru inquired. No problems on that front. I bought one for cooking class. And did you use it? There was really no point. All I did was measure ingredients and wash dishes. Figures. Mahiru sighed, as if that was exactly what she had suspected. She accompanied Amane into his apartment. There was actually another apron already there, one that Mahiru had left behind. Amane would have felt fairly uncomfortable using that one, however. Donning the apron she kept at Amane's place, Mahiru gathered her hair up into a ponytail, like she usually did. Eyes narrowed, she watched Amane put on the dark-colored apron that he had pulled from the back of a dresser drawer. Wow, I've never seen you in that before, Amane. It kind of feels like the apron's wearing you. Oh, well, excuse me. I guess there's nothing we can do about that. So you've already decided what you plan to make, right? Since you went and bought the ingredients. Mahiru took a peek at the shopping bag that Amane had set on a shelf. Amane nodded. Stir-fried vegetables and an omelette. Veggie stir-fry because I've been scolding you to eat more vegetables and an omelette because you like eggs, right? Bullseye. It's not like it was a difficult guess. What seasonings do you have for the stir-fry? This, yakiniku sauce. Oh, straight from the bottle, huh? I suppose it has that robust flavor that boys like, and I guess it is tasty. It's better than me trying to make something from scratch, isn't it? If Amane had no yakiniku sauce on hand, he'd planned on whipping up something that used salt, pepper, and soy sauce instead. Truthfully, he was glad that he did have the yakiniku sauce. Amane whispered a silent expression of gratitude for his good fortune of still having a condiment he could use, then he followed Mahiru's example and washed his hands. While he did that, Mahiru was arranging all the necessary utensils and lining up the ingredients so they would be easy to use. Truly, the angel's efficiency knew no bounds. For the veggie stir-fry, you just need to cut the vegetables up and fry them until they're cooked evenly through, okay? Do you know how to cut them? Mahiru asked. Are you making fun of me? Amane replied. It was obvious he knew that much. He wasn't very good at it, but he could handle a knife. Under Mahiru's careful supervision, Amane began to finely slice up some cabbage, but he quickly realized how meaningless his earlier words had been after he cut his own finger. First Amane had been shown how to do it, and then Mahiru left him to try on his own while she watched. He'd done fine in the beginning, while Mahiru was helping him get used to the task, but as soon as she'd left Amane on his own, he'd slipped up. Ow wow, he mumbled, looking down at his finger. It was only a small cut, but it was bleeding. The first thing to do was wash it, but of course getting it wet would sting, too. I thought something like this might happen. Here, give me that. Mahiru took a bandage from her apron pocket and skillfully wounded around Amane's hurt finger. He was equal parts grateful and impressed. You're very prepared, he complimented. Beginners often hurt themselves. You have no faith in me, do you? Despite such an accusation, Amane knew full well that there was no reason for her to think he was even slightly capable. He'd hurt himself almost immediately, after all. I do recognize that you were trying your best, Mahiru consoled. That's wonderful. Gee, thanks. I still would have liked you to ask me ahead of time, though. You say that, but it would have been awful to make you cook lunch for me, too, especially on a weekend. I know you're trying to handle things by yourself, but if you mess up and it becomes a whole situation that ends with calling me anyway, it would be easier to have just been here from the start. Fine. This time, Amane had gotten away with only a light injury, but if some terrible kitchen disaster had happened instead, or if he had used some appliance wrong and it stopped working, he knew he wouldn't have been able to deal with it on his own. Mahiru was absolutely right. And please don't ever try to fry anything. You'll start a fire, she added. I'm nowhere near advanced enough to make fried food, Amane admitted. I don't think it's actually quite that difficult. Once again, I'm forced to wonder how you survived on your own all this time, Mahiru quipped. Sorry about all this, Amane replied in a sulky voice. Now you know why I was living on convenience store food. Mahiru looked at him with concern on her face. Amane wasn't particularly disheartened or angry, so she had nothing to worry about, but Mahiru cast her eyes downward, seemingly a little troubled about something anyway. It's just I'm scared of the idea of you making fried foods, Amane, so if you really want some, please come ask me instead. All right then, tomorrow I want to eat fried mince cutlets. Immediately recovering his good humor, Amane was already putting in a request for the next day's dinner. Mahiru gave a small, relieved sigh once she heard that. All right, but you're eating plenty of cabbage salad on the side. And I'm making miso soup with lots of vegetables, got it? Yeah. And, thank you. For what? For everything. Mahiru did so much for Amane every day and still found time to worry about him. Amane was truly grateful, even if he sometimes said stupid, hurtful things. He wasn't sure where he'd be without her. Admitting as much felt a little embarrassing, though. You help me a lot, he murmured very quietly. He then promptly turned back to the vegetables. Let's eat. Sounds good. Grappling with the vegetables had taken nearly an hour, but it had been worth it. On the table was a stir-fry made from clumsily cut greens, a beautifully shaped omelette, and a pile of scrambled eggs. Naturally, the beautiful omelette was one Mahiru had made in an attempt to provide Amane with something to use as a reference. While Amane had tried his best to make a second omelette, he'd ended up with scrambled eggs instead. The failed attempt was set in front of Mahiru so she could evaluate his work. The picture-perfect example, the platonic ideal of omelettes, had been prepared for Amane. After pressing her hands together in thanks for the food, Mahiru grabbed a piece of the tattered eggs with her chopsticks to check the taste. It's flavorless scrambled eggs, all right. Didn't you add any salt or pepper? I forgot. Plus, I was supposed to be making an omelette. You scrambled it up too much. What were you thinking, mixing it with the chopsticks until it fell apart? I warned you about that. Sorry. Amane had forgotten to add the seasonings because he'd mixed up his egg while Mahiru was making her omelette. Otherwise, he'd been under careful supervision throughout the whole process. The lacking flavor and shape of his eggs was clearly Amane's own fault. On the other hand, Mahiru's dish was soft, fluffy, and unspeakably delicious. The difference between them was night and day. I think, for you, it was a really good attempt. The most important thing is that you tried. Still, I'm worried that if I let you try it on your own, the cleanup afterward will be awful, so I'd like you to take it slow, okay? Mahiru asked. I'm going to become totally reliant on you, Amane replied. It's a little late for that. Ugh, just joking. Well, not really, but I like that you appreciate my cooking, and I don't hate teaching you to cook, either, so, really, you don't have to worry. Thanks again, for everything. It was really thanks to Mahiru's kindness that Amane was able to live as well as he was. He owed her quite a bit, but he knew that Mahiru would hate it if he groveled too much, so he held his head high. Curiously, Mahiru was wearing a slightly lonesome expression as she said, If you do learn how to cook, Amane, I guess I'll be relieved of my duties. It was certainly true that when Amane learned to fix his own meals, there would be no need for Mahiru to do it for him anymore, but Amane shook his head. No, I mean, your cooking is the best, Mahiru, so please. I want to keep eating it for as long as I can. Though, I guess that's kinda shameless of me to ask. Amane would never have denied it was selfish of him to want Mahiru to continue cooking for him, but at the same time, her food was obviously leagues better than his, and he couldn't turn it away. The addiction had long since set in, and Amane was terrified of being cut off. Mahiru's eyes widened at the humble plea, and she smiled slightly. The vague tinge of loneliness vanished in an instant. Haha. You really are hopeless, aren't you? Well, I don't intend to stop, so you can relax. Thanks, Amane said, feeling relieved that the shade of anxiety he'd seen on her face was gone, replaced with a faint smile. How about I get you to help me out sometimes? Peeling vegetables, measuring ingredients, things like that, Mahiru proposed. Like a kid helping in the kitchen. Amane, that's where you need to start, you know? Since Amane's skill level truly was on par with a child's, there was really nothing he could say back. Mahiru looked amused. Chapter 13 Christmas with Everyone. Hey, Amane, can we have a Christmas party at your place? Nope. The proposal had been immediately shot down, and Chitose puffed out her cheeks to make her disappointment obvious. Christmas Eve was fast approaching, but since Amane lived separately from his family and was a loner by nature, the holiday didn't hold any real significance. Still, Chitose and Itsuki seemed keen on spending it with him and had come to ask him about holding a little celebration. Chitose had gone out of her way to barge into Amane and Itsuki's classroom at lunchtime with the idea, and now she had her cheeks puffed out because of Amane's near-instant refusal. Come on, Amane, Itsuki angled. You're alone anyway, unless maybe there's a girlfriend in the picture? No, there isn't. Well then, it's fine. Chitose interjected. Or could it be that you secretly hate us? Well, if Amane hates us, then I guess we don't need him either, Itsuki added. In their own way, his friends were probably expressing their concern for him. There was also the possibility that they were hunting for a place where they could relax and flirt. Amane felt bad about refusing them, even when they made such exaggeratedly disappointed faces at him. He didn't actually hate them. That was not to say Amane had no concerns, however. First was the thought of how the two of them would act in a private setting. Amane could feel the embarrassment washing over him at the mere thought of Itsuki and Chitose's shameless intimacy. Then there was the fact that he would have to explain things to Mahiru. She would have to steer clear until Amane's friends left, and he would have to be very careful about covering up any evidence of her frequent visits. Fine. I get it. The 24th, right? I have a condition, though, you have to set me free before nightfall and go somewhere else together to get all your flirting done. I'll remind you that excessive physical contact is prohibited in my apartment. With Amane's concession to the couple's demands, Chitose's face lit up with a smile. Guess there's nothing we can do about that rule. I'm sure we can work something out, she said. Who do you think you are to say such entitled things? Amane quickly grabbed one of Chitose's cheeks and pinched. Ouch, she slurred. Itsuki, Amane's buwing me. Come on, Amane, don't be mean to Chi. I'm the only one who's allowed to pinch her cheeks, Itsuki said. Fine, pinch her real good for me, then, Amane replied. Leave it to me. Don't you dare. Chitose cried. Amane entrusted Itsuki to carry out the sentence, but as one might have expected, he and Chitose turned it into just another excuse to flirt. Within moments, the two of them started messing around, playfully pinching each other's faces. Now Chitose actually looked happy to be pinched. Amane shrugged. Can I go? This was Amane's classroom, but he wanted to get some distance from the lovey-dovey couple before they got any more insufferable. No way. We've got to make proper plans. We need to arrange for food and a cake. I'm not making anything. There was no way Amane could fix a Christmas meal. Mahiru could handle it, no problem, but there was absolutely no way he could get her help this time. That's why Amane quickly brushed off the idea, insisting that it would be impossible for him to cook. Chitose didn't seem convinced, however, and was staring at him strangely. What? Amane asked. I was just thinking you look awfully healthy for someone who can't cook, Chitose said. So, what's the problem? Well, you see, Amane's got his own reasons for that, Itsuki commented. Well, don't you want to know about them, too, Itsuki? I'll get him to spill later. I'm not telling you a thing. Amane glared at Itsuki as if to tell him not to make promises he couldn't keep, and he laughed out loud, in a forced way. Itsuki knew when to let things go, but he had a bad habit of dredging up old stuff at rather inopportune times. You guys are a real handful, Amane muttered. Well, for dinner, can't we get takeout or something? We'll have to order the cake if we want one. Attempting to move away from his own affairs that the couple seemed so eager to pry into, he made a pragmatic proposal. There was no way he could make a cake or prepare a meal on his own, so arranging for ready-made food seemed to be the way to go. Ah, all right then, let's have pizza. I'll book a cake from my usual place, they're still taking orders. Chitos declared. You don't want chicken? Asked her boyfriend. You like pizza better, too, don't you, Itsuki? True, true. That's my chi, you know me best. Ehehe. While the two lovebirds had decided on what to get without discussing it at all with Amane, he was fine with pizza. Something like that made it feel more like a party anyway. Given the way things were going, they would probably pick up some takeaway pizzas from the shop that Amane and Itsuki often visited. The moment Amane heard the word pizza, he thought of Mahiru and when she'd nibbled her pizza like a small animal. Amane had found it strangely charming, probably because he usually saw her eating so elegantly. Come to think of it, he'd gotten Mahiru to eat cake the other day, too. Amane's cheeks glowed warmly as he remembered that. I won't do anything like that again, Amane vowed to himself. It had been so embarrassing to feed each other, there was no way Amane could endure a repeat of that. Mahiru and Amane weren't some affectionate couple like Itsuki and Chitos, so the opportunity should never come up again anyway. Hey, Amane, what's up? Oh, no, nothing. All right, we'll leave the cake order up to you. Amane had drifted back into some embarrassing memories for a moment, and Chitos had started staring at him with a concerned expression, puzzled. Panicking, Amane chased the flustering thoughts from his head and did his best to be casual. All right. Let's get our pizza order in, too, he said, a bit more worked up than usual. With Chitos's excitable voice still ringing in his ears, Amane returned home and decided to ask Mahiru about her Christmas plans. Christmas plans? I don't really have any, Mahiru replied quickly from her place on the sofa. Amane had posed the question after finishing the dishes and joining her in the living room. He'd been confident Mahiru would be going to a girls' party, but apparently, she didn't have anything lined up. Maybe Amane's surprise showed, because Mahiru made an annoyed face at him. Basically, all the girls I know and most of my female classmates have boyfriends to go out with. And I always turn down all the boys who invite me out, so my schedule is totally open, she explained. Breaking all the hearts, huh? Whenever she was out in public, Mahiru kept her guard up, and any hopeful suitors were sure to end up drowning in their own tears when faced with the angel's impregnable defenses. Still, Amane had to respect anyone who had the guts to ask Mahiru out. No one would be able to do such a thing without a huge amount of self-confidence, and Amane admired those optimistic types. I wonder why boys want to spend Christmas with me so badly anyway? Mahiru wondered aloud. They're probably hoping to get to know you better, Amane explained. What for? I mean, because they want to date you? And why would they want to date me? Probably to do all the sorts of things that dating people do. How obscene. Amane offered a silent prayer for all the guys who'd just been ruthlessly discarded. Well, I don't think every one of them is like that, so don't be too distrustful. I'm sure you understand that you're the sort of girl who draws all their eyes. You're right. It's unlikely that all of them are harboring lewd thoughts. After all, you aren't like that, are you, Amane? Have I ever treated you that way? Amane had certainly thought Mahiru looked cute, or that he wanted to rub her head, but he'd never gone so far as to fantasize about being intimate with her. If such things ever did cross his mind, Amane was sure that Mahiru would likely notice and pull away from him. It was only because Mahiru saw Amane as a harmless puppy that he could sit there next to her. Bearing so much as a single thong could be enough to send her running away. The needs of Amane's stomach ranked higher in his mind than other appetites, so he had no intention of jeopardizing his relationship with Mahiru. I suppose you're right. You never seemed to have any interest in me from the beginning, Amane. That's why I trust you. Well, thanks for that. As a guy, Amane wasn't sure how he felt about Mahiru's reasons for trusting him, but for the time being, he decided he was okay with being the safe guy. So, Amane, did you have something in mind when you asked me about my Christmas plans? Mahiru inquired. Oh, on the afternoon of the 24th, Itsuki and Chitos are coming over, so I thought I would let you know that, our usual dinner might have to start late. Having returned to the original topic of conversation, Amane carefully explained the situation while Mahiru nodded along. I understand. Please call me once your Christmas party is over, and I'll make dinner then. I'll try to take care of the prep work ahead of time, Mahiru said. Sure, sorry about all that. It's fine. Have fun. You won't be lonely? I'm used to spending Christmas alone. Mahiru's casual attitude about spending the holiday alone struck Amane as rather depressing. Perhaps thoughts of Christmas had reminded Mahiru of her parents, because a small, self-deprecating laugh slipped out. This is really presumptuous of me to say, but even if I can't do Christmas Eve, how about we spend Christmas Day together? Amane felt extremely awkward making this sort of suggestion. He didn't have any particular ulterior motive, but two people getting together on the holiday usually did carry a certain implication. There's no special meaning to this, Amane told himself. It was just that he hated when Mahiru looked so lonely, that was all. Surprised, Mahiru blinked quickly at the suggestion. Together? Doing what? She asked. Huh? Well, I didn't really have anything in mind. Sorry. Now that it was obvious he didn't have a plan, Amane figured he should drop the issue. There was also the consideration that going out together meant there was a risk of being spotted by someone from school. That would be a huge problem for Amane and Mahiru both. The best option would be spending time at home, but there was probably nothing in Amane's apartment that would interest Mahiru. It would likely boil down to just sitting next to each other, doing nothing, which would probably be incredibly awkward. If that's all Amane could offer, he suspected it was probably better to just spend the day apart. As he prepared to withdraw his proposal, he noticed that Mahiru was staring at him quietly. Okay. I'd like to try that. It was unexpected, but Mahiru actually seemed interested. Her slim finger was pointing at the television. To be more precise, she was pointing at the game console housed inside the TV stand. Recently, Mahiru had been visiting in the evenings, so Amane hadn't booted up the system much, but it seemed like Mahiru was curious about it. I've never used one of those things, she confessed in a small voice. Amane didn't have any concrete reason to refuse Mahiru if she wanted to try playing games, but the thought of a guy and girl who weren't dating or anything spending Christmas Day together playing video games was somewhat surreal. Even if he wasn't hoping for anything romantic, it was only natural that the idea gave rise to a confusing mix of emotions. Oh, well, that'd be fine, but, is that okay? To spend the day gaming? Amane asked. Is there anything wrong with that? Mahiru replied with her own question. I guess not, but, well, then let's go with that. Sure. Great, I guess that's what we're doing. Since it was what Mahiru wanted, Amane resolved himself to do everything he could to make sure it happened. He wanted to at least give her this modest bit of enjoyment. Mahiru was always taking care of him, and she hardly ever asked for anything, so he would let her play anything she wanted, as long as he had it in his collection. It wasn't like he had any plans on Christmas Day anyway, so this was a small price indeed for Mahiru's fantastic cooking. Alright, we can have a laid-back day that doesn't have anything to do with Christmas or whatever, Amane declared. Then it's decided, Mahiru answered. Amane found it difficult to look directly at Mahiru's smiling face, so instead he nodded and turned away while doing his best to look casual. Merry Christmas! Christmas Eve arrived before too long. School had already let out for winter break, and everyone was probably spending the day enjoying themselves. Itsuki and Chitose had shown up at Amane's apartment, party supplies in hand, at around 1 in the afternoon. On the table, the pizza and juice they had ordered for delivery were already laid out. The three had actually planned to meet up a bit earlier, but the Christmas crowds had slowed everything down and put them all behind schedule. Thankfully, it was only an hour past noon, and Amane hadn't been waiting too long, so no one seemed all that bothered. Yeah, Merry Christmas, Amane replied. Amane, you don't sound very excited. Try again, Chitose instructed. Merry Christmas. You're saying the words just fine, but you're not really in the spirit, are you? Amane didn't like to be compared to Chitose, who was very excitable by nature. Realizing that she was even more worked up than usual, Itsuki did his best to placate Chitose. He flashed a flippant, yet still warm smile at his girlfriend. Come on, we don't need to worry about that. Let's get to the eating part. And the having a good time part and then the falling asleep part, said Itsuki. You can't sleep here, idiot, Amane snapped. I'm just kidding, geez. Besides, if I am gonna sleep, I'm going to Chi's place. You'll have to do that when her parents aren't around. Huh, Amane. What kind of perverted things are you thinking? Chi cried. She was grinning, but Amane didn't respond. Instead, he made for the kitchen to grab some cups and utensils. Pouting, Chitose looked briefly disappointed at this lack of reaction but then quickly followed after him, shouting that she would help. The kitchen was, naturally, neat and tidy, with everything in order. Mahiru had made it her territory as of late, so all the various tools and seasonings were lined up for easy access. "Whoa, this is way cleaner than I expected," Chitose commented. "Thanks a lot," Amane responded idly. He took small plates for individual portions and some cups out of a kitchen cupboard. When he tried to hand half to Chitose, he found her staring fixedly at the cupboard. "What is it?" Amane asked. "Nothing," she answered hurriedly. Amane felt something devious behind Chitose's sly smile, and a shiver shot down his back. The best course of action for the time being was to ignore her entirely, however, so Amane did his best to act like nothing was wrong. He had a terrible feeling Chitose was brewing up some elaborate misconception, but since she hadn't said anything, Amane wasn't sure what it could be. Grimacing, Amane and Chitose returned to the living room where Itsuki was waiting. It was becoming abundantly clear that Chitose was in an even better mood than when she'd first arrived. "Seriously, though, your apartment is super clean. It's so big and luxurious," Chitose muttered. The three friends had mostly finished eating. They'd been listening to Christmas music through the speakers in the living room. There was little Amane could say in response to Chitose's comment. He was living in a nice apartment because his parents were paying for it, and the place was only this clean because Mahiru had helped him keep it that way. After considering that, all Amane could say was yeah, thanks. "It's definitely impressive how much better the place looks now that it's clean," Itsuki remarked. "Shut up," Amane shot back. Yep, I smell a girl," Chitose added. "How did you make that jump?" Amane had no idea how Chitose made the connection between his clean apartment and a feminine presence. Call it a woman's intuition. The way everything's arranged is a little off for you, personality-wise. There's something about the way the books are lined up and how the cords are all gathered to keep them from getting tangled or torn. Plus, there are all sorts of cooking implements in the kitchen that seem like they really don't belong to you, Amane. "They're my mom's," Amane lied. Preemptively, Amane had shoved all of Mahiru's things into the back of a cabinet, but Chitose must have caught sight of them when Amane had been getting the plates. Amane's tableware alone hadn't been enough, so Mahiru had brought a few things over from her place, but Amane hadn't expected Chitose to notice. For better or worse, she was not the kind of person who usually paid attention to such details. "Well, it's not like we care that much, right, Itsuki?" Amane's reply had been suspiciously slow. Sensing a deeper meaning in that, Chitose leaned over to Itsuki, grinning. Casually, and without a hint of hesitation, Itsuki reached over and rested his hand between Chitose's knees as he embraced her. It was getting extremely difficult to look directly at the couple. "Hey, why don't you get a room, you two?" Amane shouted. "Oh, you jealous, Amane?" Itsuki asked. "PSH, yeah right." Rather than any sort of envy, Amane just wanted them out of his sight. He wished they would stop, but this sort of behavior was business as usual for the couple. Scolding them for it was a waste of energy at this point. Looking very satisfied with herself as she clung to Itsuki, Chitose leaned against his chest and looked up at Itsuki's face. "I bet everyone's flirting at their own parties right about now." "Hey, don't forget you've got a guy right here crying bitter tears of loneliness," said Amane. "There's no way everyone is acting like these two. There had to be some people who were spending the holiday with family. And others who were spending it with friends. Surely there were even some spending the holiday completely alone." Amane felt like Chitose ought to choose her words more carefully. Not everyone was lucky enough to spend Christmas with other people. "Do boys really want sweethearts that badly?" Chitose asked. "I don't think they do," Amane answered flatly. "I certainly don't." "Yeah, but," Itsuki interjected, "you're an outlier." "Shut up." "Well, everyone gets restless right before Christmas, you know," Chitose continued. "Especially single guys. The other day, I asked the angel about her Christmas plans and found out she'd ruthlessly rejected just about every boy in school. She left all broken-hearted because she supposedly already made plans with someone else." Itsuki said. Amane had a feeling that someone was him. The idea that he was little more than a diplomatic excuse to turn down other dates wasn't a pleasant one, but he knew that it pained Mahiru to have to refuse anyone. If having plans with Amane helped ease Mahiru's conscience, then he supposed he couldn't object. After all, she wasn't giving his name out, so there shouldn't be any trouble. All those poor boys looked so crushed. "It was rude, but I laughed," Chitose recalled. "You shouldn't laugh," Itsuki scolded playfully. "I mean, using a holiday as an excuse to try to score a date with a girl you barely know is total crap, isn't it?" They're already off to a late start cause they haven't built any kind of relationship, so they try to take a convenient little shortcut to get to where they really want to be. Plus, I bet those guys are the kind who'd say they were taking her to a party with a lot of people but then create some excuse to be alone with her. It's a scary thing, for a girl. Chitose went on to add that the angel was certainly not the type to go along with those kinds of games anyway, then stuck out her tongue and clung to Itsuki even more, as if she'd touched on an unpleasant memory. Trendy and beautiful, Chitose had a different look than Mahiru. It wouldn't have been surprising to learn that she'd had some bad experiences with guys in the past. Amane felt a little sorry for her. Popular girls certainly had it rough. It must be hard on Sheena, dealing with all those propositions, Amane said suddenly. You're really not interested in the angel, are you, Amane? Itsuki asked. Not really, Amane replied flatly. You already have that angelic next-door neighbor of yours, huh? Chitose needled. Don't think I won't kick you out of my apartment. No, don't. I'm so scared. Chitose whined, clinging to Itsuki as she playfully glared at Amane. So you're not denying that your neighbor has been taking care of you, right? Amane's words stuck in his throat, and Chitose grinned with smug satisfaction, though her expression quickly changed when she saw his face. Don't glare at me like that. Sorry, geez, Chitose apologized in a tone that held very little remorse. When Amane narrowed his eyes at her a second time, she gave a cutesy shriek and clung to Itsuki again. Then she happened to look through the window behind her boyfriend. Something outside was surprising enough for her to stare, so Amane also followed her gaze and looked at the window, wondering what was going on. Little white flecks were wafting down from the blue sky. Ah, Itsuki, look. Snow. Chitose cried. Whoa, a white Christmas. Snow wasn't that unusual at the end of December, but it was rare to see any on such a clear day, and it seemed to delight the lovebirds. It was still daytime, and the temperature was only going to drop as the sun began to set. Christmas Eve was likely to be blanketed in snow this year. Couples all over town were likely rejoicing, and the couple in Amane's apartment had already stepped out onto his balcony for a better view. I'm sure you're going to be making out over there for a while, so I'll fix you some warm drinks, Amane shouted as he watched Itsuki and Chitose head outside. As Amane was standing up, a hysterical shriek suddenly caught his ear. Huh? Why are you here? Huh, what? Ah. The last voice in the bunch was one Amane had only become accustomed to hearing relatively recently. It rang clear and sweet. Amane felt his stomach sink. Aware that Itsuki and Chitose were huddling together on his veranda, Amane dashed out in a panic and saw that Mahiru had also come out onto her own balcony to look at the snow. In doing so, she had been spotted by Amane's friends the moment she'd leaned over the railing. Amane looked at Mahiru, who was now sitting beside him, and sighed. Faced with the terrible disaster of everyone encountering each other on the balconies, Amane had been left with no other option but to invite Mahiru into his apartment. No matter what Amane tried now, his two friends would definitely be suspicious. At this point, telling them the whole truth was probably the only way to avoid unnecessary speculations and misunderstandings. Things were bound to get worse if he couldn't keep Itsuki and Chitose quiet about this, too. I really am sorry, Mahiru said gently. You didn't do anything wrong. It was a white Christmas and also the first snow of the year. Of course Mahiru had gone to her veranda to take a look. No one could have blamed her. If Amane had heard the sound of her opening her glass door, he might have been able to do something, but there'd been music playing in the apartment, so he hadn't noticed. Mahiru had likely been trying to stay quiet anyway. Chitose was staring at Amane and Mahiru as they reflected on their carelessness, and her eyes sparkled as she leaned in close. So Amane's next-door neighbor was the angel all along. Please don't call me that. True to form, Mahiru hated being called an angel to her face and politely objected to the nickname, but Chitose was grinning from ear to ear, and it wasn't clear whether she was listening. Itsuki, meanwhile, scratched his cheek and looked back and forth between Amane and Mahiru, eyebrows raised. Wow. So, just to recap, Sheena lives next door, and she's been making you meals this whole time. Is that about right? Yeah, Amane admitted. I had a favor to repay, and I could tell by looking at him that Fujimiya was not eating well, and that bothered me, so. The two tried their best to explain how they first met and why they'd continued seeing each other. Itsuki acted like he understood but still wore an expression like he didn't quite comprehend it. Amane thought that if he were in Itsuki's position, he probably wouldn't be able to grasp the whole story, either. Who would believe that an incredible girl like Mahiru would so casually decide to start caring for an unremarkable slob like Amane? So I think I understand the situation, but what's really strange about all this is the idea that you don't have any ulterior motives toward Amane, Sheena. Like, you're basically acting as if you're his part-time wife, said Itsuki. Guh. Amane sputtered in surprise. Wife? Amane wouldn't have chosen such a word, but he had to admit that their current interactions did somewhat resemble that sort of relationship. Mahiru made him dinner every night and had even treated him to lunch on a recent weekend. On top of that, she sometimes helped him with cleaning. On the surface, it wasn't too far off from stereotypical married life. The important distinction was that neither Amane nor Mahiru harbored any romantic feelings for the other. Mahiru's eyes had also widened slightly at Itsuki's assessment, but she very quickly recovered from the shock, and Amane could see her slipping into her cordial public persona. I can assure you that I have no such intentions whatsoever. Amane realized that she was handling Itsuki and Chitose the same way she handled everyone else at school. Suddenly, he felt extremely embarrassed. It's perfectly innocent, Amane added. Sheena is just helping me out, okay? If you say so, Amane. It's just. What a strange pairing. It's really a bit hard to swallow that such an incredible girl is cooking for you. Hey, that stuffed animal you bought, was that also for her? Maybe, Amane conceded. What? Chitose broke into a shout. Oh, be quiet. I haven't said anything yet, though? Your face is loud enough. Rude. Chitose's smirk was irritating. She looked incredibly pleased with herself for having solved this mystery. Up to this point, the conversation had proceeded without much teasing, and Amane was grateful for that. He certainly didn't need any unnecessary prodding right now, and Mahiru likely wouldn't be thrilled by the idea, either. Amane had been hoping that Chitose would keep her mouth shut. Come on now, calm down, both of you. Itsuki put a stop to things before they really got out of hand. He'd picked up on the change in Amane's demeanor and was not the type to poke fun at his friend like Chitose would. Itsuki was the kind of guy who was sensitive to how people felt. Of course, Amane wished he'd stopped before prying in the first place, but that ship had sailed. After scolding Amane and Chitose, Itsuki turned back to Mahiru, who was sitting stiffly on the sidelines, and bowed his head. Sheena, thank you for taking care of our Amane. Since when did I become your kid? I should be thanking you, for being such dear friends to Fujimiya, Mahiru answered gracefully. Come on, not you, too. You're making me sound like a worthless jerk. You kinda are, though, Itsuki remarked. Hey, screw you. He'd heard Itsuki say things like that to him before, but Amane was hardly in the mood right now. Mahiru could have joined in the banter, but she wisely kept silent and smiled, content to watch the exchange between the two boys. She wasn't being quite as expressive as she was when she was alone with Amane, but that smile lifted the veil on her usual act just a little bit. Perhaps noticing, Itsuki looked befuddled. Amane made a crack about Itsuki checking her out despite his being taken, and Chitose started pouting and laid into Amane even harder. It was kind of funny, but Mahiru had her head tilted in bemusement, so Amane downplayed his enjoyment and assumed a more relaxed pose. Alright, look. We don't have a mushy sweet relationship like you guys do, but I still need you both to understand that this could get really hairy if word got out, said Amane. Got it, say nothing to nobody. Evidently picking up on his friend's attempts to point out the potential danger, Itsuki quickly nodded in understanding, much to Amane's surprise. You too, Chitose, Amane added. I'm not that much of a chatterbox, you know. Besides, no one would believe that such a cute girl is making dinner and stuff for you of all people. Well, excuse me for being so undeserving, Amane muttered. Geez, I didn't mean it like that. Amane was well aware that what Chitose was saying was true. It was difficult to accept that the star of the school was taking care of an ordinary schlub like him. If anyone did believe the story, they'd probably curse Amane's very name for being so undeserving of Mahiru's angelic attention. Amane was particularly imaginative when it came to visualizing that last part, which was why he really didn't want the truth about their relationship getting out. He could do without all the trouble. Chitose laughed at Amane's sudden humility. Then her gaze shifted to Mahiru, as if her eye had been drawn to something. Chitose let out a heavy sigh as she stared longingly at the other girl. Mahiru quickly turned uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure what to do. What is it? She asked. It just struck me all over again. Sheena, you're ridiculously cute, aren't you? Huh? Thank you very much. Having praised Mahiru right to her face, Chitose continued to stare, scrutinizing every last bit of her. This is my first time seeing you so close up, but sure enough, you really are as beautiful as an angel, aren't you? Your face has a nice shape, and your skin is lovely and creamy. Plus, your eyelashes are long, your hair is smooth, and you're slim but still curvy. Mahiru managed, flustered. Amane sighed deeply. He couldn't deal with Chitose when she got like this. While the girl definitely had her merits, there sure were some things he couldn't stand about her. He couldn't put up with her high-energy personality or the fact that she was always butting into other people's business. Amane had a particular appreciation for how difficult she could be because he had someone similar in his family. It was all the ways in which Chitose reminded him of his mother that really drove him crazy. Undeniably, Chitose resembled Amane's mother in taste and disposition. She was obsessed with cute things. Wow, seriously, looking closely, you're an incredible beauty and so cute. Hey, can I touch your hair? I mean, do you have a secret to getting your hair so smooth and shiny? What shampoo and conditioner do you use? Chitose pressed. Wait, so sudden, Mahiru stammered. Your skin's so soft, too. What kind of regimen do you follow to keep it like this? Chitose, who seemed caught between a desire to share beauty secrets and a want to poke and prod at the beautiful girl, stretched out a hand toward Mahiru as she bombarded her with questions. Amane felt sorry for Mahiru, who, despite her discomfort, was powerless against the onslaught. Cursing under his breath, Amane lightly bonked Chitose on the head. It was just a tap, since the goal was simply to get Chitose to cool her heels, but she'd apparently been caught by surprise as she cried "ow," and drew her hand back away from Mahiru. As for Mahiru, she seemed relieved by Amane's intercession. He'd forgotten about it because she was conducting herself with her usual angelic poise, but Mahiru was extremely wary around people she wasn't used to. Chitose was a girl, so Mahiru wasn't as wary as she had been with Amane, but her fear of strangers was still quite clear. I can't believe you did that. Chitose whined. She's shy, and you've only just met her, so stop trying to touch her, Amane chided. I can touch her once we get to know each other? You'll need to ask Sheena about that. Be respectful. Mahiru had obviously been getting ready to make a run for it. It was a good thing he'd stepped in. Even Chitose seemed to understand why she should stop when she saw how clearly shaken Mahiru was. I'm sorry, I got too excited and almost did something without asking, Chitose apologized. Mahiru still seemed upset by the close call, and she looked at Amane as if she didn't know what to do, her eyes pleading for help. Sheena, Chitose can be sorta a handful, but she's not a bad person, I think, Amane explained. Is that supposed to be a compliment? The excitable girl snapped. Look at the way you were acting. Can you really argue? Nope. Chitose, having just openly disavowed her own actions, stared at Mahiru for a moment, then once again extended a hand toward her, wearing a very serious expression. In that case, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. This time, however, she presented Mahiru with an open hand. Huh? Why yeah, nice to meet you. Mahiru hesitantly accepted the handshake. Once Chitose took a liking to someone, Amane knew she was determined to be their friend, whether they wanted it or not. Something told Amane that Mahiru would be swayed by Chitose's persistence. Really, as long as she didn't do anything too weird in her pursuit of Mahiru's friendship, Amane didn't mind. An ordinary, low-key relationship was best. First impressions are so important for becoming good friends, you know. You probably already know who I am, and I'm sure you've heard my name from Amane, but I'm Chitose Shirakawa. I'm Itsuki's girlfriend. I guess you could call him Amane's best friend? Oh my, I'm blushing. A best friend, wow, Itsuki ribbed. Don't act so flattered, Itsuki, it's weird, Amane shot back. There you go again. Hey, Amane, they've got a name for people like you know, sweet and sour. I'll seriously kick you out. Forcing us outside in the snow? Oh, how cruel. Don't try to wheedle your way out of this one. Itsuki cackled with laughter, and Amane looked even more annoyed. Mahiru's eyes went wide as she watched their exchange. Oh, we always act like this, Itsuki informed her as he smiled cheerfully. So anyway, I'm Itsuki Akazawa. I'm best friends with that knucklehead over there. If Amane ever does anything stupid or weird, you can come talk to me anytime. Is that any way to talk about your best friend? Amane said. Well, Fujimiya doesn't seem to have any interest in me, Mahiru said. He may not have any basic life skills, but he's an otherwise ordinary guy, so I'm not expecting any trouble. Thanks, I guess, but you could have left out the part about me being incompetent. Amane could have gone without that specific remark, but he was happy to hear that Mahiru did indeed see him as a person she could trust. Itsuki drew close and whispered in Amane's ear, "You've gotten awfully close to Sheena for somebody who says he's not interested." Amane would be lying if he said he wasn't interested at all, but he really wasn't actively trying to steer their relationship in that direction. He was certain that Mahiru just wanted a close friend, not a romantic partner. The two of them were happy spending their time together as they had been. Glancing at Mahiru, Amane saw that she'd gotten all flustered again. Chitose had begun another round of interrogation, having decided her conversation with Amane was over. However, Mahiru didn't seem to hate the attention, and Amane hoped that maybe when she got more comfortable, she might relax a little. As bewildered as she was, Mahiru responded to the barrage of questions with a small smile. It came as no small relief for Amane that the two girls were getting acquainted without any issue. "I'm really sorry." After night had fallen, and Itsuki and Chitose had gone home, Amane apologized to Mahiru, who looked more than a little worn out. It was obvious that Mahiru had been left exhausted and confused after dealing with two strangers who'd just discovered their secret. This conversation felt like an exact repeat of the one they'd had after Shihoko's surprise visit. "No, my own carelessness was what caused it, after all," Mahiru refuted. "They sure did make a fuss. They're lively people. You can be honest, they're both loudmouths. They were a little assertive, but they're interesting. A little is being very generous. Well, as long as you didn't mind, I guess it's all good." Amane was convinced that his friend's behavior had crossed the line for Mahiru, but the mild-mannered girl was taking it all in stride. He was glad that she hadn't found them too troublesome, but he wasn't sure whether it was a good thing that she and Chitose were apparently becoming friends. Chitose is a totally different type of girl from Mahiru. Very energetic? Which is nice, I suppose. He trusted Chitose not to do anything malicious, but he would need to keep an eye on her to be certain she gave Mahiru enough space. "I don't have any people like that in my life, so it was kind of fun." "Right, I imagine you don't really have anyone like Chitose in your circle. If she gets too persistent, you can just slap her, okay? IW would never resort to violence, so I'll do my best to keep her in check with my words." Chitose had an excess of energy and often let her enthusiasm get the better of her. Amane was sure that eventually his advice would be warranted. As he fixed in his mind an oath to caution Chitose directly the next time he saw her, Amane turned toward the window and watched the snow fluttering down. "If it weren't for this weather, we never would have been discovered," he thought. Snowflakes were supposed to carry good tidings for lovers everywhere, however, so Amane didn't think it right to curse them for his troubles. Mahiru also seemed to enjoy watching the snow because, once she realized what Amane was looking at, she stared out the window in the exact same way. It was winter, so the sun had set early. The sky was dark, and the snow was pale, and he could just barely see the flakes falling in the light coming from the surrounding apartment buildings. "A white Christmas, huh?" Mahiru said. "Yeah, I guess so," Amane answered. "Though, that sappy stuff doesn't have much to do with us. It's still very pretty. Isn't that enough?" Spending a romantic white Christmas together didn't mean anything to them, since they weren't a couple, but Mahiru seemed to be enjoying the sight anyway, so the snow couldn't be all bad. The dancing snowflakes lightly dusted the surroundings, leaving the dark world coated in a powdery whiteness. At the rate it was falling, the chance of the snow really piling up didn't seem very high. "If it's too heavy, though, public transit will shut down, so I hope it's only a light snow," Mahiru commented. "That's very pragmatic of you," Amane remarked. "People can't survive on romance alone," Mahiru answered. "You're exactly right." Albeit in an unusual way, the snow had brought them closer together, after all. They both smiled slightly, and Mahiru stood up. "All right then, I'll bring dinner over." "Huh, bring it over? I made beef stew at my place earlier. I thought for sure that if I roasted a whole turkey, the two of us wouldn't be able to finish it. It would never have even occurred to me to roast a turkey." "You're just bad at cooking, Amane. For lunch tomorrow, I was thinking we could make omelette rices with beef stew on top." That sounds so delicious. Amane's mind had already leaped straight past tonight's dinner and had started looking forward to tomorrow's lunch. "I like my eggs cooked hard." "What a coincidence, I've always preferred them that way, too." "Okay, I'm bringing the stew pot over." Mahiru sauntered out of Amane's apartment and headed back to her own place for a moment. Vacantly, Amane watched her as she left, reflecting on the turbulent day. He really hadn't expected to be discovered. His friends might have suspected that something was up, and Amane had anticipated them growing curious, but he never would have expected that Mahiru would simply step right onto center stage. Part of him wished that their relationship could have stayed their secret for just a little while longer. What am I thinking? Amane wondered. It was better this way. He no longer had to hide everything from Itsuki and Chitose, which made his life much easier. So then why did he feel a bit wistful? Where was this strange feeling coming from? Though everything had turned out okay, some part of Amane was still agitated, and he needed to relax. Did something happen? Mahiru had returned, holding the stew pot, and she tilted her head questioningly as she stared at Amane with a confused look. It's nothing. Amane straightened out his expression, but Mahiru still seemed puzzled for a good while by the expression she had spotted on his face. Phew, that was good. Unsurprisingly, Mahiru's cooking had been delicious. With it being Christmas, she had made even more elaborate dishes than usual. She had turned the rest of her carefully simmered beef stew into a pot pie, which she and Amane had shared. Splitting the pie open and eating the crispy, textured crust together with the rich sauce of the beef stew could only be described as a moment of sublime bliss. Mahiru had apparently prepared the pie dough especially for this. Truly impressed by her culinary prowess, Amane loosed a contented sigh while polishing off his second pastry of the day, another product of Mahiru's skilled hands. While making the dough for the pot pie, Mahiru had apparently taken the opportunity to prepare another type of sweet dough at the same time. She'd used it to make handmade milfai for dessert. This girl was already working at a professional level. I'm glad you like it. You sure ate plenty, Mahiru observed. Because it was delicious, Amane replied. Thank you for saying so. Amane had grown accustomed to seeing the faint, relieved smile that emerged on Mahiru's face whenever he complimented her food. He had made it his daily mission to see that expression, as it was so much softer than her usual reserved countenance. Though an embarrassing thought, Amane liked to think of it as a special kind of smile reserved just for him. So tomorrow we're having omelets over rice, huh? I'm really looking forward to it. You really do like eggs, don't you? You tore into those rolled dashi omelets with incredible enthusiasm. They were delicious, I couldn't help it. Even though eggs were one of his favorite foods, Amane couldn't stand them if they were badly cooked. The fact that he'd wolfed them down was just more proof of Mahiru's excellent preparation. Though Amane recognized that it was awfully selfish to be keeping her cooking all to himself, he was not inclined to share with anybody else. The plan was to keep enjoying it for as long as possible. Amane, you look super happy when you're eating, you know? Mahiru said. Of course, because your cooking is so good, he replied. I'm flattered, but, really, it's nothing that special. No, it definitely is. You need to get a better sense of your own worth. This was the homemade food of an angel. There were more than a few boys who'd do anything to have some. But to me, this is just the stuff I make every day. I'm a lucky guy. Why's that? Because the stuff you make every day is so delicious. Amane was a boy ruled by his stomach, and being able to enjoy delicious, freshly made meals so regularly was, for him, the ultimate happiness. How did you get so good at cooking anyway? Amane asked. Someone important to me once said make sure you grab anyone who makes you happy by the stomach, and I took those words to heart, Mahiru answered. Sorry you ended up grabbing me instead. I'm thinking of it as a rehearsal. Mahiru's candor caught Amane by surprise. A small smile spread across her lips. But seriously, whoever taught you must have been amazing. That's right, they were an incredible cook. I'm still no match for them. Their cooking tasted like pure happiness. Mahiru took on a faraway look with a gentle smile. The expression felt reassuring to Amane. From the way Mahiru described it, the person in question had obviously loved her very much, and Amane could tell that Mahiru had idolized them as well. She must have been really lucky to have someone like that in her life. I bet it was really good, Amane said, nodding. But you know, to me, your cooking is what tastes like happiness. Leaving his mother aside for the moment, Amane's father was a decent cook, but Mahiru's dishes suited Amane's tastes better. Mahiru's cooking was comforting yet exciting, with a relaxing flavor that he didn't think he could get tired of, even if he had it 3 times a day for the rest of his life. No matter how much he ate, he just wanted more and more. Though, of course, he could never say that. It had put too much of a burden on Mahiru. Suddenly, the girl stiffened. She looked like she'd been attacked in an unguarded moment. She stared at Amane with an innocent and somewhat vacant expression. Mahiru? Amane asked. Ah, it's nothing. Snapping back to her senses, Mahiru quickly shook her head, then stared down at the floor. Hugging her favorite cushion tight, she let out a soft sigh. Something about her had completely changed in the last few seconds. It was strangely endearing. "What's up?" Amane asked. "It's just to think that someone like me could make something taste like happiness. I don't know why you're putting yourself down, but your food is so good that I want to eat it every day. Thank you." Mahiru looked up at Amane with a bit of a bashful look and a small grin. The sight of it filled Amane with the urge to hide his face. This kind of expression was rare for Mahiru, but it inevitably set Amane's heart rattling in his chest, even though he'd constantly told himself that he wasn't interested in her like that. Seeing Mahiru's smiling visage stripped of its usual stony mask made him suddenly feel hot, and Amane worried that she would notice and get embarrassed herself. "Say, Mahiru? Yes? Tomorrow we'll be meeting up around lunchtime, right?" Unable to stand the atmosphere any longer, Amane forced a change of subject. Mahiru didn't seem to take much notice, however, and she idly considered what Amane had asked. "Yes, that's the plan, isn't it? We'll make lunch, then play games like we promised. That was it, right?" "Yeah. Unless, you don't want to?" "No, I was just confirming. Really, even though we spent Christmas Eve together, are you sure it's okay to spend your next day with me, too? If I hated the idea, I wouldn't have suggested it. I'm looking forward to it." Another small smile appeared on the gentle curve of Mahiru's lips. "Why yeah," Amane muttered. It was all he could do to turn away and hide his growing embarrassment.